During the ancient Roman Empire, many men wrote their names in the eternity of history. Some will be remembered as brave and astute commanders. Others earned fame for their cruelty and cowardice. But one name still echoes century after century: Gaius Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was born on July 13th, 100 BC. As a child, Caesar already proved himself as an adventurer, as he was an active and good-spirited boy. But at just 16, his life changed abruptly. His father passed away, and Julius suddenly became the head of his family. Julius was the nephew of Gaius Marius, a great general and politician. He became famous for his military victories and for reorganizing the model of the Roman legions. Marius was known for his magnetic personality. Also, he was immensely respected by the soldiers who fought alongside him. That influenced the character of the young Julius Caesar, who saw in his uncle a model to be followed. But during Julius's adolescence, his uncle waged a civil war against ambitious Lucius Cornelius Sulla. They fought for the control of the city of Rome. In the midst of this civil war, Julius Caesar married the daughter of his uncle's political ally. His beloved's name was Cornelia Cinna. Together, they had a daughter named Julia. Marius lost his life during a battle, and Cornelius Sulla assumed the position of dictator, something that placed him above the Roman laws, with almost absolute power in the city. Although Julius Caesar had no direct involvement in the conflict, he felt threatened by the new dictator and his uncle's executioner. Seeing no other alternative, and in an attempt to get away from Rome as quickly as possible, Julius enlisted in the army, where he fought in distant Turkey. Julius served in the army with great prominence, even receiving the civic crown as a reward for his heroic acts. He was promptly recognized by his superiors and veteran soldiers, showing a promising future as a military commander. But in 78 BC, Julius received the news that his rival had died. Cornelius Sulla had died suddenly. For Julius Caesar, that meant a chance to come home. After fulfilling his contract in the army, Julius returned to his home. However, to his misfortune, his inheritance had been confiscated by Sulla's abusive government. To survive, Caesar used his powerful voice and his oratory skills to become a successful lawyer. And by working hard, Julius Caesar was able to rebuild his family's social status. When Julius was about 25, he traveled across the Aegean Sea. The vessel was attacked by pirates, and the largest of the crew was killed. The few survivors were captured to be sold as slaves, and for those born into wealthy families, a high ransom was demanded. Further away from home, and in a desperate situation, the future seemed uncertain and bleak for Julius Caesar. The days passed slowly while Julius Caesar was kept as a prisoner on a pirate ship. When the pirates discovered that Julius was part of a wealthy family, they demanded a lot of money to free him. The pirates demanded plenty of silver coins in exchange for Julius's life. At the time, it was considered an absurd price. But Julius Caesar was always a proud and fearless man. He told the pirates that they should demand even more coins in exchange for his life. But he warned that, as soon as he was free, he would travel the seas to get back at them. The pirates mocked Julius. Throughout the journey, they ridiculed his arrogance. But at last, they accepted his cash offer. When he was finally free, Julius used his oratory gifts to attract sailors and warriors to his cause. And using the rest of his fortune, he set up a fleet of ships. Caesar spent several months sailing and facing pirate ships. His victories allowed him to make a profit by plundering the captured ships. When Julius finally found the pirates who had kidnapped him, he defeated them in battle and had the survivors crucified. The pirates paid a high price for mocking Julius Caesar. That increased Caesar's fame. His name was already popular on the streets of Rome. When he returned home, he was summoned into the army. Again, he left to fight in foreign lands. Julius stood out again on the battlefields, thus conquering the position of military tribune. This guaranteed him the right to command many soldiers and run for political office. Julius Caesar returned to Rome in 69 BC. That year he began his political career, taking up a new post in the Roman Senate. His wife Cornelia had become pregnant again. Everything in Caesar's life seemed peaceful. But to Julius's misfortune, his beloved wife died that year due to a birth filled with complications that stole her life and that of her baby. Shortly after his wife's funeral, Julius was sent to serve militarily in Spain. He was the administrator of the territories controlled by Rome. One day, Julius decided to get to know the city of Cadiz better, where he was living. After traveling some distance, he found a statue already worn out by time. When Julius approached, he noticed that it was a statue of Alexander the Great. As he approached the feet of the statue, Caesar felt an enormous torment and began crying. He was already 33 years old. He felt he had not conquered anything great in his life yet. On the contrary, Alexander the Great at that age had already conquered an empire. At that moment, Caesar swore he would not rest until he was equal to Alexander in his conquests. Julius Caesar fulfilled his role in Spain. He gained fame as a good governor and subdued 2 local tribes who had revolted against the Roman occupation. But Caesar was not happy to spend so much time away from Rome. After completing his service in Spain, he returned to his hometown. Upon his return to Rome, Julius focused his efforts on achieving new political positions. Julius wanted to be Pontifex Maximus, the highest priest of the Roman religion. But he was running against 2 other reputable senators. To support the campaign, Caesar spent most of his personal fortune. Julius Caesar knew he could not fail to win this new position. If he failed, his political career would be over, and he would be broke for the rest of his life. To get around this problem, Julius allied himself with Marcus Licinius Crassus, known for being the richest man in Rome. Crassus paid off half of Julius Caesar's debt and secured the remainder, proving to be a valuable ally. Julius was able to win the election and take on the position he had hoped for, but he needed to pay off a huge debt to Marcus Crassus. That alliance was not ignored by other powerful men. General Pompey had importance in the Roman Senate. He was respected and even feared by other senators. Pompey did not like Julius Caesar's growing ambition. He started watching that man, who seemed to stand out from the crowd. The years have passed. In 60 BC, Caesar was elected consul, the highest office in the Roman Republic. As a consul, Julius Caesar obtained great authority in the city of Rome, to the point where he could even be immune from the laws of the city and be acquitted of any criminal charge. Caesar won the election again, and as consul, he proved to be a dangerously ambitious man. That year, Julius married Calpurnia, who would be his wife for the rest of his life. General Pompey publicly showed his aversion to Julius Caesar, and also his discontent with Marcus Crassus. To solve this issue, Julius met with Pompey and Crassus to form a new political and military alliance. This alliance became known as the First Triumvirate, in which the 3 most powerful men of Rome would work together to rule Rome. Pompey increased the number of soldiers on the streets of the city, providing more security to the population. Crassus bought a large naval fleet and wanted to establish trade routes in distant lands, such as Syria and Egypt, increasing his personal wealth and bringing new products to the demanding Roman markets. And Caesar took the military command to conquer new lands for Rome. Julius Caesar's fortune seemed promising again. He would not waste the opportunity to immortalize his name in history. Julius Caesar was elected to the post of Roman consul, gaining great authority in all the territories conquered by Rome. But to achieve such an important position, Julius Caesar needed to incur a gigantic debt to Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Caesar had not yet forgotten that day at the foot of the statue of Alexander the Great. The desire to match Alexander in his conquests was still alive in Julius Caesar's heart. the best way to achieve his goals was to conquer new territories for Rome, thus confiscating the riches and receiving part of the taxes of the conquered cities and villages. It was there that Julius Caesar focused his attention on Gaul. Gaul was an ancient region, classified by the Romans, comprising territories where France, Belgium, and part of Italy and Germany are located today. For the most part, Gaul was a wild territory, full of forests and inhabited by several very hostile Celtic tribes. With these obstacles, Gaul was not easy to invade, much less to conquer. Because it was a difficult task, Julius Caesar made Gaul the main target of his ambitions. In April 58 BC, Caesar marched towards Gaul in command of 4 legions, some 24,000 soldiers. Julius knew he could not simply enter the Gaul territories. It was necessary to plan his actions carefully, otherwise he would lose everything for which he fought so long to conquer. Despite its apparent military strength, Gaul was divided into several kingdoms, which were constantly fighting each other. These kingdoms were commanded by tribal chiefs or self-proclaimed kings. They often declared wars to conquer new agricultural lands, or to avenge old blood feuds between tribes. Taking advantage of this instability, Julius Caesar sent emissaries to talk with the leaders of the different tribes, seeking to establish political and military alliances. In his letters, Julius offered the military support of his legions in exchange for permission to enter Gaul territory and food provisions for his soldiers. The first alliances were quickly formed, and Caesar finally entered Gaul. The first conflict between Caesar's legions and the Gauls took place at the Battle of Bibracte, where the Romans found a far greater number of enemies. The Gauls were part of the Helvetians tribe, who were migrating in Gaul, attacking other tribes and leaving a trail of destruction. Julius Caesar organized part of his legions on top of a hill, gaining a strategic position against the Gauls. The other parts of the legions were hidden on another hill, covered by trees. The Roman legions managed to stop the Gauls' initial advance. It was the start of a long and arduous struggle that would last almost a whole day. At the ideal moment, Julius ordered the hidden legions to attack the rear of the Gaul army. The Gauls resisted for some time, but the discipline and determination of the Roman legions defeated the numerical advantage of their enemies. The Helvetians surrendered. Julius allowed many to be freed, provided they returned to their lands, and agreed to work the crops to feed the legions. Others were not so lucky. They were sent as prisoners to Rome, where they would be sold as slaves. This heroic victory marked the beginning of several conquests in Gaul. Soon after, Caesar and his legions fought the Germanic tribe of the Suevi and achieved another major victory. In the years that followed, Julius Caesar continued to advance in Gaul territory, establishing new alliances, subduing tribes, or, when necessary, destroying cities and settlements. Obviously, the Gauls did not peacefully accept the Roman occupation. At times, some tribes rebelled, which provoked new battles. After suffocating a rebellion by the Belgian tribe in 55 BC, Gaul had been almost completely conquered by Julius Caesar. Caesar had accumulated enough wealth to pay his debt to Crassus, and after that, he would have enough to live in peace. His term as consul was also nearing its end. After that, he would have to return to Rome. But that year, one of his legions in northern Gaul sighted a strange island on the horizon. That island was Britain. Caesar had already read about the existence of that island in ancient Greek manuscripts. Upon learning of its location, he again felt the ambition and desire to reach where no other Roman had been. To cross the sea and reach Great Britain, Julius Caesar needed 2 things: boats to transport the soldiers, and time. Caesar ordered the construction of some boats, whose completion would take many months. Impatient with the slow progress in the construction of the boats, Caesar decided to take a risk. Only part of his legions would cross the sea to build a fortified camp. But he did not anticipate the disaster that eventually occurred, for that region is often affected by storms. During the crossing, a strong storm pushed the Roman ships against the cliff rocks. The few survivors who reached the beach were surprised by the Breton war chariots and retreated to their boats. This defeat did not affect Julius Caesar's resolve, but it took him a long time to get the necessary votes. In 54 BC, Julius Caesar finally arrived in Great Britain, where he initially set up a fortified camp near the beach. The Bretons did not peacefully accept the Roman occupation. Caesar spent over a year in Britain, warring and subduing the numerous tribes of that territory. This new conquest further enhanced Julius Caesar's reputation. The people in the city of Rome extolled his accomplishments, which concerned even more some members of the Roman Senate. During the time Julius Caesar spent in Brittany, new problems began to arise in Gaul. Tribal leaders asked their warriors to gather and expel the Romans from Gaul. Caesar knew this threat was serious. If Gaul united under a single flag, it would be virtually impossible to recover the conquered territories. One of those insurgent leaders was the famous Vercingetorix, prince of the Arvinus tribe. Vercingetorix was able to bring together many tribal chiefs and warriors under his command to attack the Roman garrisons in Gaul. When Caesar returned to Gaul, Vercingetorix was forced to retreat to avoid a direct confrontation with the Roman legions. In his escape through Gaul territory, Vercingetorix's troops destroyed everything in their path, burning villages and plantations to leave no food for the Romans. The strategy was working. The situation of Caesar's legions was not positive. Soldiers began to succumb due to hunger and effort caused by the long march. Julius Caesar again used his persuasion and began to intimidate and bribe the tribal chiefs who were not yet allies of Vercingetorix. Caesar managed to confiscate precious provisions to feed his soldiers and continue the pursuit of Vercingetorix. Some battles were fought along the way, and Julius Caesar proved his worth again by getting off his horse and joining his soldiers in the vanguard of the most chaotic battles. The legionaries felt an enormous pride and admiration for the general. Many fought to the end to defend Caesar's life and dreams. Finally, Vercingetorix was forced to retreat to the city of Alesia, built on top of a hill and a good place of defense against the Roman legions. The siege of Alesia was one of the most famous in history. Julius Caesar and Vercingetorix needed to make the most of their skills as commanders. Caesar surrounded the city of Alesia. He knew that if he tried to force his way into the city, it would cost the lives of many of his legionnaires. The other alternative was to force those inside the city to starve and thirst, forcing them to surrender. But Caesar did not have much time. He was aware of the approach of a Gaul army, whose mission was to rescue the inhabitants of Alesia. If this Gaul army arrived in time, Julius Caesar and his legions were surrounded by two enemy forces and would have no chance of victory. The solution was to build two wooden walls around the city. One would keep the inhabitants of the city trapped inside. The other would be able to contain the approaching army. The strategy was successful. When the Gaul army arrived, the Roman legions showed their worth again, defeating a far greater number of enemies. After witnessing this great victory, Vercingetorix surrendered to Julius Caesar. On a historic day, Vercingetorix proudly put on his armor and rode alone to the Roman camp. He stood face to face with Julius Caesar, and without saying a word, threw down his arms in a sign of Gaul's surrender. With the conquest of Gaul, Caesar achieved everything he had always desired. His name was admired and feared among the Romans. His wealth was vast. He felt ready to return triumphantly to the city of Rome. Julius Caesar performed the incredible feat of conquering Gaul, and even the Bretons on their distant island fell to their knees before the Roman military power. Many years had passed since Caesar left his beloved Rome, and he longed to return to his birthplace. However, many things changed during his absence. One of his most important allies, the consul Marcus Crassus, had his legions defeated during the dismal Battle of Carrhae, where the Romans encountered the powerful army of the Parthian Empire. Marcus Crassus was an outstanding merchant and negotiator, but his skills as a military commander were not as sharp as those of Julius Caesar and Pompey. Crassus perished in that battle, and with that, the triumvirate alliance was broken, allowing General Pompey to take political control of Rome. The emerging famous and wealth of Julius Caesar deeply concerned General Pompey, who, right from the beginning, already had a great contempt for him. Without the presence of Marcus Crassus to support Julius Caesar in the Roman Senate, General Pompey no longer saw any reason to tolerate Caesar's existence and began to make serious accusations against him. Pompey claimed that Julius Caesar had extended his campaign in Gaul for too long, whose original deadline was just 5 years. Pompey knew this was not true. He had secretly met with Marcus Crassus and Julius Caesar to decide the city's politics, and in this meeting, they agreed to give Caesar 5 more years to conquer Gaul. Another accusation was that Julius had used the strength of the legions for his own benefit and made his fortune in the Roman Senate. Pompey issued an order to Julius Caesar. He would have to disband his legions and return to Rome, where he would face a trial in the Senate. At that time, there were few in the Senate with enough courage to oppose Pompey's demands. Julius knew that, if he abided by that order, his life would be over, and everything would be lost. He then decided to march to Rome with his legions and demand respect, even if this had to be done by force. And so, in the year 49 BC, Julius Caesar and his legions were declared enemies of Rome, in an event that has been recorded in history as the Second Civil War of the Roman Republic. Caesar was not concerned when the news reached him. He already knew about Pompey's aversion to him, and a direct confrontation between the two was unavoidable. Julius Caesar found himself facing the sad reality that, in order to return home, he would have to attack his own city. Pompey was an experienced general and knew that Rome could not hold out long against the veteran legions of Gaul. He needed to amass more soldiers to defend the city, and to achieve this, he called in the legions that were serving in Greece and in the nearby territories. And a race against time then started. Pompey anxiously awaited the arrival of more soldiers, while Caesar marched as fast as possible to reach Rome before Pompey's reinforcements. To make Caesar's situation worse, he had the Rubicon River in his path. The Roman generals were expressly forbidden to cross the Rubicon with their legions on their way to Rome. Caesar knew that to cross the river meant no turning back path. In this context, Julius Caesar uttered one of his most renowned quotes, "Alia jacta est," luck is cast. Crossing the river with his legions would take a massive amount of time, and Caesar did not have that. He decided to take his chances and move forward with only one legion in a forced march. The other legions would follow immediately behind at a slower pace, preserving their strength for the upcoming battle. Both captains experienced anguishing days, but Caesar's legions again proved their worth and arrived in Italy with remarkable speed. Seeing no other alternative, Pompey gathered his personal guard and, together with some senators and allies, left the city of Rome shortly before Caesar's arrival. Pompey headed for the Roman city of Brundisium, from where he embarked for Greece, with the plan to meet with the local legions to set a counterattack against Julius Caesar. When Julius Caesar finally entered the city gates, the streets were basically deserted. The Roman citizens were unsure of Caesar's intentions. Perhaps he would return as a hero, or, in alternative, as an enemy, seeking revenge for having been exiled from his city. But they had nothing to fear. Caesar did not allow his legionnaires to attack the population nor to plunder the city. When the weather in the city got milder, Caesar made a public speech, reassuring the population. He appointed one of his most trusted men to take charge of the city. The chosen one was Mark Antony, who had served with Julius in Gaul and proved himself as an excellent military commander. Caesar still had to wait some months to carry on with his persecution against Pompey. New boats had to be built to carry the legions across the sea. While the boats were being built, Caesar restored order to the city of Rome by passing new laws, electing new senators, and taking care of the city's financial affairs. Still waiting for the boats to be finished, Caesar went to Spain. There, he defeated Pompey's supporters, ensuring that Rome would not be attacked while he was heading for Greece. In 48 BC, Julius Caesar and Pompey finally fought their first conflict in the Battle of Dyrrhachium, which took place in a region in northwestern Greece. Much to Caesar's surprise, Pompey assembled a remarkable army of about 36,000 infantry soldiers and 7,000 knights. Julius Caesar feared that new reinforcements would arrive for Pompey. He decided to act quickly, setting up a fortified camp with only 22,000 men ready for the battle. The result was nothing short of disastrous for Caesar. Pompey attacked a weak point in the wooden wall that protected Caesar's camp, and the chaos spread quickly. With fewer soldiers and having his defenses compromised, Julius had no alternative but to order a total withdrawal. This defeat reminded Julius Caesar why Pompey the Great was one of the greatest generals of his time. He could not be underestimated again. Caesar retreated to a new camp, but had little food and drinking water for his men. With his provisions almost ending, Julius Caesar needed to act quickly. On August 9, 48 BC, the Battle of Pharsalus was fought in the region of Thessaly in central Greece. The fight got off to a slow start, with both generals carefully studying the opponent's movements. A fight between two Roman armies, trained with the same formations and tactics, could not have a simple conclusion. The battle was extremely aggressive. Both sides attempted to outflank their opponents. Pompey benefited from a larger cavalry, but Caesar's veterans had already faced all sorts of challenges and could not be easily dominated. Even being at a great numerical disadvantage, Caesar's legions managed to withstand the enemy cavalry and outflank the infantry, gaining total control of the battle. Pompey saw his army being destroyed before his eyes. He understood that he was not facing an ordinary man. Pompey was defeated and had to withdraw as quickly as possible. After that defeat, General Pompey found himself in a dreadful situation. Most of the senators who had left with him for Greece were now fleeing to other Roman colonies. Some even went to meet Caesar, begging for forgiveness. Pompey fled to Egypt, which, at the time, was part of the territories ruled by Rome. He sought refuge among the Egyptian nobility, but he did not expect a cruel twist of fate. Some members of the Egyptian elite feared that if they protected Pompey, they would be enticing Caesar's fury, who was already heading towards Egypt. Pompey was attacked and killed as soon as he set foot on Egyptian soil. A great Roman general had found an unglorified end in foreign lands. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was received at the royal palace of Ptolemy XIII. As soon as he asked about Pompey's whereabouts, only the remains of his former rival were handed to him. Caesar was enraged. He planned to forgive Pompey and bring him back to Rome. He would even allow him to occupy a seat in the Senate. The disrespect was even greater when considering that Pompey was a Roman consul and had been murdered cowardly by foreigners. It was too late for Pompey. Julius Caesar, now in Egypt, found himself a conspiracy target in the land of the pharaohs. The days were hot as usual in the Egyptian lands. Even for a Roman used to the demanding weather of the Roman Republic's capital, the Egyptian heat caused great discomfort. Also, the customs of that exotic people were nothing short of odd for Julius Caesar. After the long and exhausting persecution of Pompey, Julius Caesar and his soldiers needed a well-deserved break. With that intention, Caesar decided to spend a few days in Egypt, staying in the royal palace in Alexandria. In Rome, Caesar was elected to the position of dictator, the most powerful role in the Roman Republic. Caesar would remain in office for 1 year. Julius Caesar finally reached the top of his political and military career. However, peace never lasted long in Julius Caesar's life. In 48 BC, Egypt was going through a civil war. The renowned Cleopatra wanted to claim the royal throne from Ptolemy, her younger brother. Julius Caesar did not like Cleopatra's brother. After all, Ptolemy was one of those responsible for Pompey's death. Knowing this, Cleopatra started to devise a plan to meet Caesar. Using a creative plot, Cleopatra managed to enter Caesar's room. That unusual presence caught the attention of the Roman, and Cleopatra explained to him the political situation in Egypt. People claim that on that very night, Julius Caesar and Cleopatra became lovers. Caesar supported Cleopatra's ascension to the throne, securing the military support of her legions and fighting Ptolemy's troops. A sequence of battles was then fought, which became known as the Siege of Alexandria. Finally, Ptolemy was defeated in the deadly Battle of the Nile in 47 BC. This battle's key conflict was fought in the Nile waters, where Julius Caesar's war galleys faced Ptolemy's vessels. During the fight, Julius Caesar's ship eventually capsized, forcing the great Roman general to swim to the riverbank to save his own life. Ptolemy's boat also sank during the fight, but he was not so lucky. He drowned in the Nile. After this battle, Cleopatra took command of Egypt, and her romance with Julius Caesar was already the subject of much gossip and unhappiness in Rome. Mark Antony, in command of the city of Rome, was struggling to maintain political order and cover up Caesar's delay in returning to his Senate duties. And, even though he was a target of harsh criticism, Julius Caesar decided not to keep his romance a secret. He opted to bring Cleopatra to see Rome, something that was interpreted as a major insult by many noble Romans. Julius Caesar also traveled to the Middle East, where he obtained a landslide victory against King Pharnaces II's army. The victory against King Pharnaces II was so rapid and easy that it inspired Caesar to say one of his most famous quotes, "Veni, vidi, vici." I came, I saw, I conquered. Time passed, and the loving relationship between Caesar and Cleopatra caused great distrust among the Roman magistrates. Some rumors mentioned Cleopatra giving birth to a son of Julius Caesar. The couple's supposed son was named Ptolemy XV Caesarion. Nevertheless, Julius Caesar never officially recognized the child, although Cleopatra claimed that she was sure that Caesar was the father. Many senators started to fear that Julius Caesar was trying to make himself emperor, and by having a son with the mighty Queen of Egypt, he would be beginning a line of heirs with rights to command both the Roman and Egyptian territories. Also, some senators and Roman noblemen did not like Julius Caesar and were always looking for reasons to criticize him. Some of these senators were former supporters of Pompey. Although they had chosen the enemy side, they were forgiven by Caesar. To make things worse, during a festival known as Lupercalia, Mark Antony tried to crown Caesar's head with a golden diadem, typical of Greek kings. The gesture was supposed to be a joke, but this was interpreted as an insult by those at the party, even though Caesar tried to quickly remove the item. Julius Caesar did not seem to care much for the opinion of his opponents and started delegating political positions to friends and relatives. He also started to create laws that were approved without the senators' consent. Caesar kept augmenting his power and his sphere of influence in the city. Even with all his achievements, Caesar still wanted to start a new military campaign against the powerful Parthian Empire, which remained strong against every Roman onslaught. In 44 BC, the Roman Senate appointed Julius Caesar as perpetual dictator, guaranteeing him the right to hold office for the rest of his life. When he was 55 years old, Julius Caesar remained as ambitious as ever. This increased the fears of his opponents in the Senate, who began to devise a plan against the great general's life. The main supporter of the conspiracy against Caesar was Senator Gaius Cassius Longinus, who spared no effort to convince other senators to join his cause. On March 15, 44 BC, Julius Caesar went to the theater of Pompeii, where a session of the Roman Senate would take place. That same day, Mark Antony became aware of the plan against Caesar and ran to warn him of the impending danger. Upon entering the Senate, Caesar was amicably welcomed by the senators, among whom was his nephew, Marcus Brutus, for whom Caesar held in great esteem. In order not to arouse any suspicion, one of the senators handed over a parchment with a petition for Caesar to assess. The other senators walked to him, pretending to be interested in reading what was written. Then, the nearest senator drew a dagger that was hidden in his own cloak and grabbed Caesar's robe. Julius Caesar tried to dodge his attacker, but the senator started yelling for help, demanding the other members of the conspiracy to advance. Caesar was attacked by 60 senators, being mortally wounded by about 23 dagger wounds. One of the last to do it was his own nephew Marcus Brutus, who dealt the fatal blow. In an ironic touch of fate, Caesar fell at the feet of Pompey's statue. When he looked up, He saw the face of his nephew, and, with his last bit of strength, he pulled a part of his cloak to cover his face, avoiding the shame of looking into the traitor's eyes. Julius Caesar survived countless battles and challenges in his life, but now he lay motionless on the cold floor of the Roman Senate. There are no accurate accounts of Julius Caesar's last words. Some believe he said to his nephew, "Et tu, Brutus?" But this sentence was written by William Shakespeare and immortalized in the play in which he portrays Julius Caesar. But the writers Suetonius and Plutarch believe that Caesar did not say a single word at the moment of his death. After Caesar's assassination, most of the senators fled from the Senate, fearing they would be caught by the soldiers who were guarding the city. The conspirators believed that Caesar's death would bring the city's political power back into the hands of the Senate. However, they did not expect the emerging popular uprising. Caesar was seen as a hero by the majority of the population. When the news of his death spread, the citizens of Rome began to gather to protest against it. Julius Caesar's body was brought to be cremated in a public place. According to the tradition of the time, a massive number of people attended the ceremony, and, as a farewell gesture, they threw wood and personal objects to the funeral pyre, causing the fire to rise to such an extent that it damaged the Senate building. The crowd ran after the conspirators Cassius and Brutus, who, amid that confusion, managed to flee to Greece. Brutus, perhaps consumed by regret, ended up committing suicide in 42 BC. Queen Cleopatra and her son Caesarion were in Rome at the time, but they returned to Egypt a few days after Julius Caesar's death. In a public square, Mark Antony read the will of Julius Caesar. He pointed out his great-nephew, Gaius Octavius, as his successor, and gave him the right to use the name Caesar. Gaius Octavius changed his name to Gaius Julius Caesar Octavius, and, a few years after his uncle's death, he was crowned as the first Roman emperor. The following Roman emperors began to include the surname Caesar in their own names. The great story of Julius Caesar came to an end, but the name of this remarkable man became synonymous with greatness. Rhea Silvia was the daughter of Numitor, king of Alba Longa, when her father was deposed by Aemulus the usurper. Rhea was forced to serve among the Vestal virgins, so that she would not continue her father's lineage. But Rhea Silvia was seduced by Mars, the Roman god of war. She gave birth to twins Romulus and Remus, but the children were born condemned to death. Amulius ordered the two children to be thrown into the Tiber. Rhea Silvia was imprisoned, and the children were put in a basket and thrown into the river. The children were carried by water to certain death, but this was not the will of the gods. As fate would have it, the basket was left stranded on the banks of the river, where a she-wolf was quenching her thirst. Contrary to expectations, the she-wolf did not devour the babies. She took them from the riverbanks near the Capitoline and Palatine hills. In her cave, the she-wolf suckled the two boys. Thanks to the she-wolf's milk, one of the most important cities in the world arose. Pastor Faustulus found the children under a fig tree. On the branch of the tree was a woodpecker, a bird sacred to the Latins. The shepherd rescued the children and raised them together with his wife. The brothers grew up to be strong and daring young men. They were hunters and robbed travelers who crossed their land. One of these raids did not end well for Remus, who was captured and taken to Alba Longa. Romulus wanted to rescue his brother, but before that, his adoptive father revealed the truth about his noble ancestry. Upon learning that his grandchildren were still alive, Numitor supported Romulus's attack, giving him warriors to help him in battle. Romulus led the attack on Alba Longa. During the battle, Amulius, the usurper of the throne, was killed, and Remus was rescued. Romulus and Remus returned the crown of Alba Longa to their grandfather, but found that their fate was not in the city. They gathered some men to found a new one, close to the place where the she-wolf rescued them. Romulus and Remus disagreed on where the city should be founded. Romulus wanted to choose the name Rome and found it near the Palatine Hill. Remus wanted to name the city Remora and found it on the Aventine Hill. the brothers began to build their respective settlements. But when Romulus began to set the sacred boundaries of his territory, the dispute between the brothers reached a critical level. Remus again disagreed with his brother. In an act of provocation, Remus overstepped the borders of Rome. Romulus attacked his brother in a fit of rage. Even though Rome was founded in a brotherly tragedy, it grew and prospered over time. Romulus reigned over the city for 38 years. At the end of his life, Romulus was raptured by the gods and divinized. Rome's founder came to be idolized as the warrior god Quirinius. In the following centuries, Rome became the most important city in the ancient world. A great empire emerged from Romulus's founded city. The Roman people have a legendary origin forged in iron and blood. The founding of the city was marked by the fratricide of Remus, who was killed by Romulus, the founding father of Rome. Early in his reign, Romulus created the first Roman legion, brave men willing to defend the city and shed blood for Rome's glory. From among the wealthiest and most respectable elders, he raised a class of leaders known as patricians, lords of political and religious power. The assembly of these noble patricians became known as the Roman Senate. But, despite this early development, Rome faced a serious problem: the lack of women in the city. Without mothers to give birth to true Romans, the city could never flourish. Roman emissaries tried to bargain marriages with kingdoms neighboring Rome, but the monarchs distrusted the Romans and were unwilling to give them their daughters. Romulus was not satisfied and devised a plan to achieve his goal. The Romans invited the neighboring Sabines to the Great Games in honor of the gods during the harvest festival. The Sabines were an Italic tribe living in the hills adjacent to Rome, known for being fierce warriors and having beautiful women. During the festivities, Romulus gave his men a sign. They suddenly grabbed the Sabine women and took them into their homes. The Sabines were outraged by such an act, but they were not prepared to fight. Still, they swore revenge. War between the two peoples was declared. The conflict was long and brutal. The Sabine and Roman armies clashed several times. Led by King Titus Tatius, the Sabines tried to invade Rome, but could not break through the city's defenses. Rome was besieged on all sides. Meanwhile, the captured Sabines began to cling to their Roman captors and had already begotten several children. But there was one betrayal. Tarpeia, daughter of the head of the Capitoline Guard, opened the gates to her enemies in exchange for valuable golden bracelets. The Sabines took the opportunity to invade Rome, but they felt such contempt for the traitor that they hurled the bracelets against her and crushed her with shields for her undignified behavior. A new battle began between Romans and Sabines. It was difficult to predict the winner, but it was quite likely that the cost would be so high that the result would be a Pyrrhic victory. That's when the brave Sabine women, with their Roman children in their arms, stood between the two armies and begged for the fighting between the two peoples to end. They pleaded with the Romans not to kill their in-laws and asked the Sabines not to liquidate the fathers of their grandchildren. They would rather die at that moment than become widows and orphans. After the Sabines intervened, peace between the Romans and Sabines was sealed. Romans and Sabines became one people. The Sabine king Titus Tatius went on to reign alongside Romulus over the city, whose splendor would one day eclipse all others. After the death of Romulus, the founder of the city of Rome, Numa Pompilius took over the government. Numa was elected unanimously because he was the most virtuous man among the Latins. Numa Pompilius did not disappoint the people and ruled Rome for 43 years. His reign was noted for peace and prosperity. But Numa Pompilius was succeeded by Tullus Hostilius, a military leader who believed that the time of peace promoted by Numa had softened the people, and that the warriors were becoming weaker and weaker. Tullus began to stir up trouble with the Romans' neighbors, generating small conflicts. But these squabbles did not seem to satisfy him. So, Tullus Hostilius decided to wage war on a larger neighbor.
the city of Alba Longa. The Albans had no fear and took their men to the battlefield. But Metius Fufetius realized that a bloodbath would only weaken the two peoples, leaving them both vulnerable to the Etruscans. So he proposed that 3 champions from each side fight for the honor of their respective people. The Romans agreed. The 3 Roman champions made up the Horati, one of the most prominent Roman families. The brothers Publius, Servilius, and Marcus swore before their father that they would fight on behalf of the Roman state, for the honor of the people, and for their family against the Curiati, a prominent Sabine family to whom the Horati were connected through marriage. One of the Roman brothers' wives was of the Curiati family, and their sister Camilla was engaged to one of the Albans' champions, with whom she was hopelessly in love. The women watched the Horati brothers leave, and knew that, regardless of the outcome of the confrontation, they would lose the one they loved. The 3 Horati brothers and the 3 Curiati brothers fought bravely and without mercy for their opponents. 2 Horati brothers fell before their foes, but not without first wounding them. Publius Horatius had to face 3 enemies alone. Publius was an experienced and cunning combatant. He decided to retreat while facing his opponents, fighting them individually without being surrounded. Horatius achieved the impossible. He killed all 3 Curiati, bringing great glory and honor to his homeland and family. Seeing her brother return with her dead groom on his shoulders, Camilla tumbled down and mourned her lover's death. Publius took up his sword and killed his sister, saying that such was the fate of any Roman woman who mourned for her enemy. Publius was tried for the murder of his sister, but acquitted by the jurors, as they considered Camilla a traitor for mourning the death of the enemy, and not the demise of the honorable brothers who had sacrificed themselves for the glory of Rome.
The Roman legions were already fighting in the Italian peninsula even before the creation of the Roman Republic. They were brave and fierce fighters on the battlefields of antiquity. But in 107 BC, the famous Roman general Gaius Marius carried out several reforms that made the Roman legions the best fighting force in the ancient world. Gaius Marius was an important Roman politician and general of the late Roman Republic. He was consul 3 times, with an important role in fighting barbarian invasions and defending the Roman Empire. But he became best known for military reforms that improved the organization and efficiency of the Roman legions. Before Marius's reform, the legions were loosely organized. The army was not permanent and was formed by Roman citizens who used their own resources to buy the necessary equipment to fight Rome's enemies. The training and discipline of these legions were limited, as they returned to their civilian life when a military campaign ended. The upper ranks of the military career were only for those who had political contacts. Meritocracy was rare, but Marius had set his sights on leaving this obsolete army behind by embarking on a major reform to modernize the legions. His reform created a permanent armed force. Legionaries were now recruited for permanent service, not just in a time of war, as was the custom in the ancient world. The recruitment structure was more stringent, based on age, health, and skills. Marius also established standardized equipment, including shields, swords, and armor, to improve the unit's cohesion and efficiency. The implementation of such strict maintenance for military equipment was a significant change carried out by Marius. This program included regular checks of the equipment to identify all problems before it impaired combat performance. In addition, damaged or worn parts were replaced quickly to ensure that the legions always had access to high-quality combat equipment. Rigorous maintenance also included accumulating stocks of spare parts so that the legions could be outfitted quickly in emergencies. This change was critical to ensure that the legions could continue to perform their task effectively, regardless of weather conditions or other challenges. Marius created specialized units to fulfill specific tasks, such as archers, javelin launchers, and heavy infantry. This reorganization into specialized units allowed the Roman legions to be more efficient and flexible in combat. Each unit could be used more effectively depending on its specialization. Another benefit of the reorganization allowed commanders to better evaluate and manage the performance of each unit. This enabled more efficient allocation of resources and opportunities to improve military efficiency and training. Prior to the reforms, the Roman legions were commanded by elected military tribunes, each responsible for a small group of soldiers. Marius changed this system by establishing a clear hierarchy of command, with senior officers assigned to command larger groups of soldiers. This allowed orders to be transmitted more efficiently, and strategic decisions to be made more quickly and effectively. The centralized command structure allowed commanders to have a broader perspective of the situation on the battlefield and could make more informed decisions. The creation of training programs for officers was a crucial part of Marius's reforms of the Roman legions. The goal of these programs was to ensure that officers had the ability to effectively lead the legions on the battlefield. The training included classes on strategy, combat tactics, logistics, intelligence, and leadership. Officers also simulated battles to test their own skills and prepare them for real-life situations. These training programs were instrumental in improving the efficiency and fighting ability of the Roman legions, an important factor in the success of many military campaigns. Conscripts also underwent rigorous training. Prior to this, military training in the Roman legions was limited and inconsistent. Marius changed the system by establishing detailed and uniform training programs for all legions. He also devised regular exercises and maneuvers to keep soldiers fit and prepared for battle. The implementation of health and wellness programs for soldiers also had a positive impact on Marius's new legions. These programs were intended to improve the health and fitness of the soldiers to make them fit for combat at any time. This included proper nutrition, regular exercise, medical care, and treatment for injuries. These programs also contained measures to prevent disease, such as building bathing facilities and providing clean drinking water. This change was critical to ensuring that the legions were healthy and ready to fight. The adoption of a more sophisticated logistic structure was essential to modernizing the Roman legions. This change was intended to ensure efficient and effective support for the transportation of supplies and troops during military campaigns. A more advanced intelligentsia structure was also one of the goals of Marius's reforms. The goal was to provide the legions with accurate and up-to-date information about the enemy. This entailed creating specialized intelligence units, secure communication systems for information exchange, the use of spies, and reconnaissance missions. Measures were also made to protect the information collected, such as encrypting messages and protecting trusted sources. This intelligence data would allow the Roman legions to have an advantage over the enemy. A huge change was made to the legion's disciplinary structure, ensuring that soldiers followed established rules and regulations, adopting proper conduct during military campaigns. This included severe punishments for serious infractions, such as deserting or disobeying orders. These offenses could even be punished with the death penalty. The new disciplinary system also established a clear hierarchy structure in the legions, allowing superiors to exercise greater control over subordinates. The rigidity of the new disciplinary structure encouraged or coerced soldiers to behave more appropriately, improving the discipline of the troops. Another important point in Marius's reforms was the creation of a meritocratic promotion structure in the Roman legions. This valued the outstanding performance of soldiers, rewarding those who excelled in combat or other military activities. Prior to the reform, promotions were based on political or social factors, leading to unfair outcomes. The new structure allowed soldiers to be evaluated based on performance and skills, not just by their political or social connections. This motivated soldiers to work hard and also increased the efficiency of the legions, as promotions were now given to the most capable soldiers. Of course, political influence did not stop playing a role in promotions. Having a certain name allowed the military to rise in the career more easily. Gaius Marius's reforms were decisive for the military and political success of the Roman Republic. These changes made it possible to create more organized and effective legions, and Roman generals were successful in military campaigns, controlling their conquests. In addition, Marius's reforms also enhanced the political power of the generals, allowing them to earn prestige and influence in Roman society. The reforms had a lasting impact and enabled the Roman legions to reach the ends of the known world, helping the legionaries fight more effectively for Rome's glory.
In the powerful Roman army, soldiers were brought to the limit of their physical strength and endurance. Many men stood out and showed an above-average fighting ability. These high-value soldiers were given special positions, such as the Optiones, who were responsible for keeping orders in line and punishing careless legionnaires. And even when the legions set up their camps, Roman discipline remained firm. The camps were carefully planned and well protected. The center of the camp was known as Praetorium. That's where the Roman officers and nobles stayed. To protect the safety of this vital part, an elite guard was created, composed of the best Roman legionnaires. And that's how the glorious story of the Praetorian Guard began. During the rule of Augustus, the Praetorian Guard gained even more prominence. It was appointed as the emperor's personal guard. Since then, all Roman emperors had a Praetorian Guard at their disposal. As the legions could not enter the city of Rome, a reasonable contingent of guards was required. At its peak, it had 8,000 elite soldiers. The Praetorian Guards were different from the other soldiers. They wore a darker uniform and could use purple, a very noble color in Roman culture. During the history of ancient Rome, the Praetorian Guard was used not only for the emperor's defense, but also to conduct less noble and honorable services, such as imprisoning and executing senators or anyone considered a threat. The Praetorian Guards would have to take an oath directly to the emperor and respect all the sovereign's orders. In case of civil war, or if Rome was captured by enemy armies, the Praetorian Guard would be the city's last line of defense. Above all, it would protect the emperor's safety, down to the last man. But that loyalty wasn't blind. In some cases, the Praetorian Guard had an influence on the rise or fall of Roman emperors. It is said that the Praetorian Guard played a role in the murder of the cruel Emperor Caligula, who, in addition to disrespecting his own guards, punished them cruelly, often without any reason. In order to belong to the Praetorian Guard, a legionnaire had to serve in the army for at least 16 years. Only after that could they go through the admission process. Many legionnaires sought this promotion, since the members of the Praetorian Guard had better salaries and equipment. Generally speaking, the work was less tiring and dangerous. Within the Praetorian Guard, there was another group, which was considered to be the elite of the elite, the Speculatores Augusti. Besides being commanders of the guard, they were the men in whom the emperor had absolute confidence, and they were always beside the monarch. As time progressed, the Praetorian Guard accumulated great power within Rome, becoming a kind of autonomous organization that commanded the city's politics with an iron fist. The elected emperors needed the approval of the Praetorian Guard. Even the murder of several emperor candidates was ordered. Due to the excessive authority of the Praetorian Guard, Emperor Constantine issued a decree abolishing this military force. The following emperors began to create their own personal guards. The story of the fearsome Praetorian Guards had come to an end, but its existence has been a model for various elite military forces over the centuries. The powerful god worshipped by the late Roman legions, Mithra fulfilled an important role throughout the spiritual and cultural life of the Roman Empire before its downfall. Drawn from Persian tradition and converted by the Romans into a virtue and courage symbol, Mithra became the center of one of the most influential ancient mystery religions. With its secret rituals and profound symbolism, Mithraism provided its adherents, especially the legionaries, with a strong spiritual connection and an unbreakable brotherhood. Mithra stood for light, truth, and discipline, all of which were considered essential for the Roman army's cohesion and survival. Roman tradition holds that Mithra was born from a rock, an event known as the Petra Genetrix. This miraculous event symbolized the god's purity and spontaneous strength, as he arose already armed and ready for his great feats. With his Phrygian cap, Mithra was often portrayed holding a torch and a dagger, symbols of light and power.
This divine interpretation positioned Mithra as an entity bound for great accomplishments and to play a vital role in the cosmic order. Soon after coming into being, Mithra took his knife and harvested the sacred fruit from the tree of life. This fruit stands for the continuity of life and the connection between the material and spiritual worlds. Mithra's main narrative is known as the tauroctony, the struggle and sacrifice of the sacred bull. Entrusted by a superior deity, Mithra pursues and captures a mighty bull, leading it to a cave where it is slaughtered. This brave deed of grabbing the bull by the horns and then slaying it is steeped in symbolism. The blood of the sacrificed bull begets life, fertilizing the earth and assuring the continuous renewal of nature. Beside Mithra, animals such as the dog and the snake drink the lifeblood, while a scorpion strikes the bull's testicles, representing the struggle between the forces of life and destruction. This sacrifice not only ensures earthly prosperity, but also represents the victory of light over darkness. Following the sacrifice, Mithra is often portrayed sharing a banquet with Sol Invictus, the invincible sun, one of the main deities of Roman mythology and worshipped by the legions. This alliance between Mithra and the sun god enhances his association with light and celestial power. The banquet is a moment of celebration and renewal, representing the eternal friendship between both deities. This sacred union was especially meaningful for soldiers, who saw Mithra and Sol Invictus as the protectors of their lives and battles. Mithraism developed into a mystery religion, which meant that only the initiated had access to its secrets, with covert rituals and a hierarchy of initiation symbolizing the adept's spiritual journey. There were 7 degrees of initiation, each representing a step in the spiritual ascent, bringing the initiates through the cosmos towards oneness with the divine. This system provided a clear path to enlightenment and transcendence, strengthening discipline and loyalty among followers. Mithraism found a foothold among the passionate Roman soldiers. Its emphasis on camaraderie, discipline, and fortitude deeply appealed to the legionaries, who faced constant challenges and dangers. Mithrae, temples dedicated to Mithra, were often built near military camps, providing worship and communion sites for the soldiers. In these sacred areas, the legionaries not only found spiritual shelter, but also a brotherhood that bolstered their unity and morale. Mithra's sacred fruit is also seen as spiritual sustenance for initiates. In many mystery traditions, eating a sacred fruit is an act of communion with the divine, symbolizing the intake of the divine essence and the adept's spiritual renewal, like the communion of the Christian Eucharist. The temples consecrated to the cult of Mithra, known as Mithrae, were frequently built in natural caves or in specially dug underground sites, reflecting the mythical cave where Mithra is said to have carried out his most famous feat, the sacrifice of the sacred bull. This secret underground setting was ideal for the secret rituals and the mysterious spirit that pervaded the cult of Mithra. In the Mithraic myth, the cave where Mithra sacrifices the bull is sacred and represents the womb of the earth, the place where life is renewed through sacrifice. As such, the Mithrae acted as a microcosm of the universe, a place where initiates could connect with the cosmic mysteries and partake in the divine play of renewal and fertility. The temples also provided community sites for Mithra's followers. The ritual banquets celebrated in the Mithrae fostered fellowship and solidarity among the members, cementing loyalty and mutual support. Far from the turmoil of everyday life, initiates could ponder the Mithra mysteries and pursue a deeper understanding of the universe and their place in it. Throughout the first centuries of the Roman Empire, Mithraism and Christianity arose as 2 of the most influential and contending religions. Both offered a spiritual vision of salvation, community, and life after death, drawing a growing number of followers. Their theological differences, ritual practices, and social structures, however, led to a substantial dispute over religious supremacy in the vast and diverse empire. But the Mithra cult was uniquely male and strongly hierarchical, limited to initiates, whereas the Christian message was inclusive, accepting men, women, and children from all social backgrounds. Mithraism stressed the struggle between light and darkness, with Mithra as the god of light, providing renewal and fertility through his sacrifice. Salvation was achieved through partaking in the mysteries and rituals, and through loyalty to the god Mithra.
On the other hand, Christianity focused on Jesus Christ's life, death, and resurrection. Salvation was a gift bestowed by God, attained through faith in Christ and divine grace. Christian ethics prioritized love of one's neighbor and forgiveness. While highly popular, Mithra worship's secretive and exclusive nature limited its growth compared to Christianity, whose universal message and wide community chain spread more widely and quickly throughout the empire, albeit as a persecuted practice. Christians faced persecution during the first centuries of their refusal to worship the Roman gods and the emperor. But the Christians' resilience, their charitable deeds, and the promise of eternal salvation attracted many new followers. As Christianity rose and the Roman Empire underwent political changes, Mithraism began to decline. The Edict of Milan in 313 AD, granting religious freedom to Christians, and the Edict of Thessalonica in 380, declaring Christianity the official religion of the empire, were instrumental for the demise of Mithraism. Many of the Mithraic temples were deserted or converted into Christian churches. As the god of light and loyalty, Mithra took a leading role in the spiritual life of the Roman Empire. His cult, featuring mysterious and profound symbolism, offered his followers a powerful connection with the divine and a sense of brotherhood and discipline. The influence of Mithra continued to resonate even after the rise of Christianity, symbolizing the eternal human quest for light, truth, and renewal in a rapidly changing world.
March 15th, 44 BC, caused great changes in Western history. Julius Caesar, the great Roman general and dictator, was assassinated by a group of conspiratorial politicians during a Senate session. The coup plotters argued that this was the best course of action, given the fear that Julius Caesar would undermine the institutions of the Roman Republic. Julius Caesar had no heirs. His son with Cleopatra, known as Caesarion, was not legally recognized as a Roman citizen. In his will, Julius Caesar chose his great-nephew, Gaius Octavian, as his heir. This decision forever changed the life of young Octavian, who in the future would be known by the name Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The death of Julius Caesar caused a rift in Rome's government. The senators who plotted against Caesar's life underestimated the Roman general's popularity with the people. With quick actions by Mark Antony, Julius Caesar's former general in the conquest of Gaul, and his personal friend, the entire population of Rome learned of the assassination. A crowd gathered in front of the Senate and expressed their anger against the assassins by burning the Senate house. When Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, the 17-year-old Gaius Octavian was studying and receiving military training in Apollonia, a Roman city in Illyria in the Western Balkan Peninsula. Octavian rejected the advice of some army officers to take refuge with his troops in Macedonia. He sailed to Italy to ascertain whether he had any political or financial assets. The decision by Octavian could have been fatal, as he could have been the target of an attack by Julius Caesar's remaining enemies. After landing in Lupiae, near the ancient city of Brundisium, Octavian read the will. It was there that he decided to become Caesar's political heir, as well as inheritor of 2/3 of his estates. To Octavian's misfortune, power in Rome was divided between Consul Mark Antony and Aemilius Lepidus, one of the most influential politicians in the Roman Senate. There was a conflict of interest between Octavian and Caesar's former supporters, especially Mark Antony, who refused to hand over the financial inheritance that was Octavian's right. With enormous determination and cunning, Octavian, although young, succeeded in winning over many of Caesar's former supporters, including some legions. In 43 BC, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Aemilius Lepidus created the Second Triumvirate, a power-sharing agreement that divided the territories of Rome among them. This agreement was made to balance the political powers in Rome and appease a possible civil war. The territories ruled by Rome were divided. The east went to Mark Antony, Africa to Lepidus, and the west to Octavian. The peace did not last long. In 41 BC, Mark Antony established a romantic and political alliance with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt and former lover of Julius Caesar. This alliance continued even after a senatorial decree forced the marriage of Mark Antony to Octavian's sister, known as Octavia the Younger. To continue his relationship with Cleopatra, Mark Antony divorced Octavia in 32 BC. This decision angered Octavian. In retaliation, Octavian declared war on Cleopatra. This sparked the famous Battle of Actium on September 2nd, 31 BC. Octavian's naval fleet cornered and defeated Mark Antony's ships. Cleopatra's navy rushed to the aid of her lover, but in the end, the two were defeated and narrowly escaped. Mark Antony and Cleopatra returned to Egypt, where they committed suicide. Aemilius Lepidus, politically weakened, was Octavian's next target, as he wanted to consolidate his power in Rome. But Lepidus could offer no resistance. Octavian became Rome's undisputed ruler. But the shrewd Octavian knew better than to hurry his climb to power, otherwise he would suffer the same fate as Julius Caesar. He knew how to charm the Senate and the people, defending Rome's republican traditions, without showing any aspiration to dictatorship or monarchy. On January 16, 27 BC, the Senate awarded Octavian the new titles Augustus and Princeps. The name Augustus was inherited by all future emperors, becoming the emperor's main title. For political and personal reasons, Octavian decided to underline his family's link to Julius Caesar by adding the surname Caesar to his honorary titles. He became known as Gaius Julius Caesar Octavian Augustus, and later Emperor Caesar Augustus. The month of August is due to a decree in honor of Emperor Caesar Augustus. Before this change, August was known as Sextilis because it was the 6th month in the Roman calendar. In 19 BC, Augustus received the title Imperium Maius, finally attaining supreme power over all the provinces of the Roman Empire. After that, Caesar Augustus ruled surprisingly well, becoming the first emperor of Rome and a model for all following emperors. Regarding Augustus's appearance and personality, it is reported that he was short, handsome, and of good physical proportions. He had charisma, an essential attribute for rulers. As for his character, it is said that he was cruel as a young man, but became milder with maturity. However, this can be justified by the consolidation of his power. With a more secure leadership, the need for brutality diminished. He remained prepared to be ruthless whenever necessary. He tolerated criticism, had a good sense of humor, and a special taste for playing dice. His public moral attitudes were rigid, a trait he probably learned from his great-uncle Julius Caesar. An example of this was when Augustus exiled his daughter, Julia, because she offended his principles and defiled the family name by participating in parties filled with alcohol and immoral affairs. Augustus's reign was a golden age in every way. Augustus's peace became known as Pax Romana. The economy, arts, and agriculture flourished. An ambitious program of building and renovating Rome was begun, where Augustus completed the plans made by Julius Caesar and then proceeded with his own grandiose undertakings. He restored or built about 82 temples in 1 year. The famous public Roman baths were built during Augustus's reign. He passed many comprehensive reforms and laws to maintain stability in marriage and increase the birth rate in Rome. But there was one episode that undermined Augustus's reign. An alliance of Germanic peoples ambushed 3 Roman legions, led by the general Publius Quintilius Varus. The Germanic alliance was led by Arminius, a Germanic officer who had Roman military education. He managed to methodically outwit the Romans and predict the tactical responses of the enemy army. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest is considered one of the most important defeats in Rome's history, abruptly ending Augustus's triumphant period of expansion. The outcome of this battle dampened the Romans' ambition to conquer Germania. It is considered one of the most important events in European history. Upon learning of the defeat, Emperor Augustus was so shaken that he banged his head on his palace walls, repeatedly shouting, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." At the age of 75, Augustus's health deteriorated, and he prepared for a peaceful transition in power. He chose his adopted son, Tiberius, as heir. Augustus died in the city of Nola in southern Italy in 14 AD. His last official words were, "I found Rome built of bricks. I leave her clothed in marble." There were rumors that Livia Drusa, Augustus's wife, caused the emperor's death by giving him poisoned figs. But some historians consider that these rumors were a lewd fabrication by Augustus's political enemies. Alternatively, it is possible that Livia gave a poisoned fig as an assisted suicide to ease Augustus's suffering. This was common practice among the nobility of the time, who considered this gesture a way to depart with dignity into the afterlife. Augustus's body was returned to Rome, and, on the day of the funeral, all businesses in the city closed out of respect for the emperor. The body was cremated and the ashes buried in his mausoleum. Augustus's death was seen as the loss of a great ruler, brimming with talent and vision. He was proclaimed a god among the host of the Roman pantheon. Tiberius Caesar Augustus was the second Roman emperor. His reign lasted from 14 to 37 AD. Tiberius is usually described as enigmatic and darkly complex, intelligent and cunning. But he had bouts of severe depression and dark moods that had a major impact on his political career. His 23-year reign as emperor is considered the beginning of a dark period in Roman history. Tiberius was the adopted son of Caesar Augustus, the first Roman emperor, but he never aspired to follow in the footsteps of his stepfather. This was decided by his mother, Livia, who according to historical records was controlling and authoritarian. Soon after his birth, Tiberius was destined for a public career, for his parents were descended from the Claudian gens, one of the most prominent patrician houses of ancient Rome, which for many generations provided leaders for the Roman Republic. When Tiberius was 4 years old, his parents divorced and his mother married Octavian. This way, the infant Tiberius became the stepson of the future ruler of the Roman world. During Tiberius's childhood, the old republican system, run by the Senate and magistrates, was finally overthrown. It was replaced by an autocracy, where the capable and ambitious Octavian was elected emperor. Tiberius became a strong, big man, educated in oratory, and winning legal disputes as a lawyer. Despite being groomed by Augustus as his successor, Tiberius was the fourth choice after Agrippa, husband of Julia, Augustus's only daughter, and sons Gaius and Lucius, but they all passed away abruptly, leaving only Tiberius as the candidate. Tiberius was quickly given a military command and proved to be a brilliant general. He conquered the mountainous area of Raetia in present-day Switzerland. Later, he also conquered large parts of Pannonia and Illyria, facing large barbarian armies. Tiberius also launched an offensive on the Danube and defeated the Germanic tribe of the Marcomanni. He returned to Rome and was consul for the second time. He also received control of the Roman provinces in the east. Despite these successes, Tiberius was not happy. The reason for Tiberius's unhappiness was his forced divorce. He was married to Vipsania Agrippina, and, although they had a happy marriage, Augustus ordered the two to divorce after the death of Vipsania's father, who was married to Julia, Augustus's daughter. Although Tiberius wished to remain with Vipsania and despised Julia for her alleged infidelity, Augustus ordered the marriage to Julia to tie Tiberius's growing power to the Julian family. In 2 AD, Tiberius's unhappy marriage to Julia was annulled, and, on the order of her father, Emperor Augustus, she was exiled, supposedly for adultery. But, most likely, this was because of the deep dislike that Tiberius felt for her. With the death of the two heirs apparent, Gaius and Lucius, both victims of illness in military campaigns, Augustus recognized Tiberius as his successor. In 4 AD, Augustus officially adopted Tiberius, adding the words, "I do this for reasons of state." These words show that Augustus did not want to make Tiberius his successor, and even Tiberius didn't seem to have the will to take on the responsibility. He was already in his 40s when he finally adopted, a common practice in ancient Roman politics. When Augustus died on August 19th in 14 AD, Tiberius's position was established. After so many years of living under his stepfather's orders, Tiberius finally assumed the mantle of power. After Augustus was buried and deified, his will was read and honored. The Senate met on September 18th to inaugurate Tiberius's new reign as emperor. The accounts of the time say that Tiberius renounced before the Senate various powers and titles. Perhaps trying to imitate Augustus's behavior in his rise to power, Tiberius tried to pass himself off as a humble and unambitious person, but ended up spoiling the performance. He declared that he was too old for the burdens of statehood, and said that he did not want the office of emperor. Finally, Tiberius accepted the powers that were voted to him. His first years as emperor went well. He shunned much of the pageantry after his ascension, respecting the Senate's authority. Considered avaricious by some and modest by others, He initiated many public works projects that were not completed. The second emperor's reign respected the imperial system and ensured its acceptance by most local elites. Everything changed when Germanicus, Tiberius's adopted son, died. The emperor sent Germanicus to serve in the eastern military campaigns, where the young general won important victories. Also in the eastern provinces, Germanicus came into conflict with the Roman governor of Syria, Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso. During the dispute, Germanicus became ill in Antioch and died in 14 AD, at the age of only 33. His death was attributed to poisoning, but this was never proven. As a famous general, Germanicus was extremely popular and seen as an ideal heir to the empire. Calpurnius Piso, once considered a personal friend of Tiberius, was accused of being the mastermind behind Germanicus's poisoning. He was summoned to Rome to answer the charges, and, despite his appeals to the emperor, he was forced to commit suicide. Germanicus's death changed the personality of Tiberius, who became increasingly cruel and suspicious. Tiberius ordered the imprisonment, torture, and execution of many nobles accused of conspiring against his government. His reputation as a ruthless tyrant made him unpopular with the people of Rome. More and more rumors arose about Tiberius living a secret life, with parties filled with alcohol and depravity. As time passed, Tiberius showed less and less interest in political life, making annual excursions to the Campania region of southern Italy. By 26 AD, Tiberius had had enough. Almost always happier away from the capital and its everlasting intrigues, the emperor simply headed for his vacation mansion on the island of Capri and never returned to Rome. The government passed to Lucius Aelius Sejanus, commander of the Praetorian Guard. Power quickly went to Sejanus's head. He began to abuse his authority, sometimes acting like the real emperor. But he made a fatal mistake. He accused the two intermediate heirs to the throne, Nero Caesar and Drusus Caesar, of plotting treason against Tiberius. Nero Caesar was banished to an island and sentenced to commit suicide. Drusus was imprisoned in the basement of the imperial palace, where he died of starvation. Tiberius may have retired to the island because he disliked politics and intrigue, but he could ruthlessly exercise his power when the need arose. He drafted a letter ordering the immediate arrest and execution of Sejanus, who was imprisoned during a Senate meeting, and summarily executed. His corpse was dragged through the streets and thrown into the Tiber River. His family and many of his supporters suffered similar fates. To lessen further political intrigue in his succession, Tiberius drafted his will, choosing the 24-year-old Gaius Julius as the chief heir. Gaius Julius was the youngest son of the late Germanicus, the Emperor Tiberius's adopted child. This was perhaps the worst decision of Tiberius's life. To his and the people of Rome's misfortune, Gaius Julius proved to have an extravagant, cruel, and perverted nature, becoming better known during his reign by the name Caligula. Tiberius died on March 16, 37 AD, months before his 78th birthday. Tiberius's death is surrounded by mysteries and rumors, including the hypothesis that the emperor was poisoned by Caligula, starved to death, or suffocated with a pillow at the hands of the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, Naevius Sutorius Macro. Tiberius was later remembered as a dark, reclusive, and gloomy ruler, someone who never wanted to hold that office. The Roman writer and historian Pliny the Elder dubbed the late Tiberius the saddest of men. Tiberius was not popular in his time, but history has shown that he was one of the most important military commanders during a critical period. Tiberius expanded the empire and helped protect the borders for many decades. As second emperor, he greatly strengthened the imperial office, promoting the cult of the emperor and ensuring the subordination of senators. He increased the security of future Roman emperors. Vespasian was the sixth Roman emperor. He is considered one of the most important of ancient Rome, as he restored order and stability to the empire, which had been weakened by the excesses of his predecessor, Emperor Nero. The story of Vespasian's reign was a tale of wars and intrigues, with the protagonist being an unlikely hero by the standards of Roman history. Born on November 17, 9 AD, in Rieti, north of Rome, Vespasian was baptized with the name Titus Flavius Vespasian. His father was Flavius Sabinus, a tax collector who held an important position in his village. His mother, Vespasia Pola, belonged to an equestrian family, and his brother, also named Sabinus, became a senator. Although he did not belong to a noble family, Vespasian was a military tribune in Thrace and a financial official on the island of Crete and eastern Libya. He commanded a legion in Germany and Britain, participating in more than 30 battles and capturing at least 20 cities. Around 60 AD, Vespasian served in Africa, where he suffered the scorn of the local population who despised the Roman presence in the region. Vespasian stood out for his honesty, as he was recognized for not embezzling taxes for his own financial gain. As a consequence, he suffered financial problems and only avoided bankruptcy with the help of his brother, Sabinus. To recover his fortune, Vespasian engaged in the trade of pack mules. In his private life, Vespasian was married to Flavia Domitilla, with whom he had 3 children. Apparently, their marriage was based on love and not political ambitions, as was common at the time. While Vespasian was fulfilling his duties away from Rome, the Roman Empire was going through turbulent times. Within a few years, the empire was ruled by emperors Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. Around 66 AD, Vespasian became part of Nero's imperial entourage in Greece, a position considered of great importance. However, Vespasian made a terrible mistake. He fell asleep during one of Emperor Nero's endless and tedious recitals. Nero was feared for his volatile personality and had already ordered the execution of other people who had disrespected his artistic performances. Vespasian fell into disgrace and fled to an obscure country town, hiding for fear of becoming a victim of Nero's wrath. To Vespasian's relief, there was a Jewish rebellion in 67 AD. Nero needed a commander who knew ways to expel the Jews from their walled cities, and Vespasian was pardoned. At the age of 58, Vespasian went to Judea commanding 2 legions, with 8 squadrons of cavalry and 10 auxiliary cohorts. Eventually, thousands of Jews were killed, and the Romans destroyed many cities to re-establish control over Judea. During this conflicted period, Vespasian is remembered as a just and humane officer, using violence only when necessary. Everything changed in 68 AD, when the Emperor Nero suffered a coup d'etat and was declared a public enemy. Nero fled Rome and committed suicide. His death began the period known as the Year of the 4 Emperors, where between 68 and 69, there were 4 Roman emperors. After a brief period of civil war, Rome witnessed the rise and fall of 3 Roman emperors. The first to assume the office of emperor was Galba, and he was assassinated by Otho, who became the next emperor. Otho committed suicide after being defeated at the Battle of Bedriacum, where he faced a rebellion led by Vitellius. With this victory, Vitellius was proclaimed emperor. Rumors against Vitellius were quickly born among the Roman legions. By this time in his life, Vespasian was already a general admired by his legions, and even by other important generals in the Roman army. Vespasian's rise to emperor occurred in an unusual way, as he showed little interest in politics. Some increasingly detested Vitellius, and Vespasian was proclaimed emperor by his own legions, who swore him total loyalty. Other generals serving in the East quickly encouraged their legions to join Vespasian, making him master of half the Roman world. Vespasian acted quickly and sent troops as far as Italy to confront Vitellius. Meanwhile, he crossed Egypt and captured Alexandria, cutting off the supply of grain to Rome. Vespasian was the first Roman emperor since Augustus to visit Egypt. At the Alexandrian Hippodrome, he was hailed as a pharaoh and proclaimed by the Egyptians as the son of the creator deity Ammon. While still in Egypt, the Roman Senate recognized Vespasian as emperor on December 21st, 69, beginning the Flavian dynasty. Vitellius was defeated by Vespasian's forces at the Second Battle of Bedriacum. Vitellius was captured, tortured, and killed. Upon his arrival in Rome, Vespasian was welcomed as the new Roman emperor on December 26, 69 AD. Vespasian was an effective emperor. One of his first acts was to restore the army's morale. Then, he rebuilt many of the houses and buildings burned during the last days of Vitellius's reign. Vespasian built new temples and the huge Colosseum, also called the Flavian Amphitheater. The ancient historians who lived in this period, such as Tacitus, Suetonius, and Josephus, speak highly of Vespasian while condemning the previous emperors. Many other philosophers and writers had their works confiscated, destroyed, and denounced because they were considered too critical of Vespasian's reign. Several Stoic philosophers were accused of corrupting students with improper teachings and were expelled from Rome. Vespasian was known for his intelligence and kindness, along with his dominant personality and military talent. He was liberal with senators and with cities and towns devastated by natural calamities. His appearance was quite modest, being a bald man with a broad face and retracted chin. Vespasian was a sarcastic and jovial humor, a rare trait in such an important ruler. After ruling the empire for a decade, Vespasian contracted an illness while traveling through Campania. Upon his immediate return to Rome, he headed for his customary summer retreat to the hot springs in the Sabine Hills. The natural springs could do little to help the condition, which worsened dramatically, evolving into diarrhea. Even though he felt death approaching, Vespasian did not lose his sense of humor, saying, "I think I am turning into a god." According to the Roman historian Suetonius, Vespasian, suddenly consumed by illness, said, "An emperor ought to die standing up." And, as he struggled to stand, he died at the age of 69, in the arms of those who tried to help him rise from his bed. Vespasian was among the few Roman emperors to die of natural causes, a testament to a successful reign. For the first time in Roman history, a Roman emperor was succeeded by his own biological son. Vespasian's eldest son, Titus, became emperor. After his short but successful reign, Titus's younger brother, Domitian, took over as emperor. Vespasian's story is an example that sometimes those who do not desire power turn out to be the best rulers. Considered by many scholars to be the greatest Roman emperor, Trajan reigned from 98 to 117 AD. The Roman Senate awarded him with the honorary title Optimus Princeps, meaning the best ruler. Trajan is recognized for being generous to his subjects and a benevolent governor, responsible for creating public projects that benefited the Roman population and the rest of the empire. During Trajan's reign, the Roman Empire expanded its borders to their maximum extent. Born on September 18, 53 AD, in the Roman province of Hispania Baetica, now the Spanish region of Andalusia, and a member of a wealthy family, Trajan was baptized with the name Marcus Ulpius Trajanus. During his youth, Trajan served in Syria as a military tribune. He enjoyed a prosperous career, reaching the rank of praetor in 85. Shortly thereafter, he headed the 7th Gemina Legion in northern Spain. A few years later, Trajan rose to prominence again during the reign of Emperor Domitian as general of the Roman army on the Germanic border. With Domitian's assassination in 96 AD, the office of emperor passed to Marcus Cocius Nerva, an old childless senator who was unpopular in the Roman army. After narrowly escaping a conspiracy against his life by the Praetorian Guard, Nerva realized that he had to get the support of the army to avoid being ousted from his new position. To achieve this goal, Nerva needed allies with influence in the army. There was no one better than the respected Trajan. In the summer of 97, Trajan was named Nerva's adopted son and successor. Trajan was governor of Germania Superior, where he learned of the adoption. But he was cautious about his new social position. Instead of quickly returning to Rome, Trajan decided to summon the Praetorian leaders responsible for the mutiny against Domitian and probably against Nerva, promising them a promotion in the army. But instead of receiving the promised promotion, they were executed as soon as they arrived in Trajan's domains. These ruthless actions clearly showed that Trajan would not tolerate traitors in his future reign. Nerva died of natural causes on January 28, 98. Trajan was quickly appointed emperor by the Roman Senate. His appointment made Trajan the first Roman emperor born outside Italy. Trajan did not immediately return to Rome. Instead, he surveyed the borders of the Rhine and Danube, twice defeating a revolt by the people of Dacia, where present-day Romania is now. He used the spoils from these victories to finance public works projects in Rome. Among these projects was a spacious new forum with 2 libraries and a huge stone column called Trajan's Column. The column was covered with sculptures depicting the victory over the Dacians and still stands today. Located in Trajan's Forum, near the Quirino Hall, north of the Roman Forum, the column is approximately 30 meters high, plus 8 meters of pedestal, for a total height of 38 meters. Trajan's Column is one of the largest and most important monuments that survived the fall of Rome. Finally, in the summer of the year 99 AD, Trajan entered Rome on foot. He embraced each of the senators and even walked among common people. This display of humility was a sign that Trajan was unlike any other emperor. The Roman historian Cassius Dio wrote, "Trajan was remarkable for his justice, bravery, and simple habits. He was an emperor who was concerned with good government and public welfare, establishing an excellent social policy." Trajan invested heavily in promoting popular entertainment. One of the most notable events was a gladiatorial festival that lasted 3 months at the Great Roman Colosseum. Between chariot races, animal fights, and gladiatorial combats, the bloody spectacle allegedly caused 11,000 deaths and attracted a total of 5 million spectators from the festival. The state-funded public entertainments helped to maintain contentment among the populace and further boost Trajan's morale. Despite all his virtues, Trajan was not a perfect man. He overdrank wine and liked to have relations with young boys. Although this was common practice among the nobility of ancient Rome, it was not a well-regarded custom when pursued by the emperor. Trajan was also known for his bellicose side. He seemed to enjoy the battlefield and devising war strategies. In 1113, Trajan embarked on his last military campaign, whose goal was to regain control of the empire's eastern frontier. This new wave of conflict began when the kingdom of Parthia decided to put a king of its people on the throne of Armenia, which was a Roman buffer state. Trajan first marched on Armenia and annexed it to the Roman Empire. Then, he and his legions marched south, conquering the cities of Babylon, Seleucia, and finally the capital of Parthia, called Ctesiphon. He continued to the Persian Gulf, where he declared Mesopotamia a new province of the Roman Empire. In Trajan's reign, the Roman Empire stretched from Scotland to the Caspian Sea, ruling millions of subjects throughout the territory. In early 117 AD, Trajan fell ill and left for Italy. His health worsened during the spring and summer of that year, increasing the probability that he was poisoned, although there is no evidence. Trajan arrived in the southern Anatolian city of Selinus, where he died suddenly, probably on August 11th, 117, apparently a victim of a stroke. His body was taken to Seleucia, where it was cremated. His ashes were transported to Rome and placed in a gold urn at the base of Trajan's Column. He was elevated to the rank of deity in the Roman pantheon by the Senate. His cousin, Hadrian, whom Trajan is said to have adopted as his son while on his deathbed, was chosen as emperor. Hadrian, upon becoming ruler, returned Mesopotamia to Parthian rule, as he considered this a province too expensive and far away to be defended by the Romans. However, all the other territories conquered by Trajan were kept. In the rest of the history of the Roman Empire, even in the Byzantine Empire, all new emperors after Trajan were honored by the Senate with the following prayer: "May you be luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan." Unlike many rulers in history, Trajan's reputation survived unchanged for nearly 19 centuries. Later, theologians, such as Thomas Aquinas, consider Trajan an example of a virtuous pagan. Trajan will always be remembered as a strict but fair ruler who found an effective balance between territorial conquest and maintaining a high quality of life for his people. Emperor Hadrian ruled from 117 to 138 AD. Hadrian was noted for his complex personality, his fondness for poetry and the arts in general, and his deep admiration for Greek philosophy and culture. Hadrian was known for his public speaking, and some historians considered him one of the most talented men in Roman history. Hadrian was born on January 24th, 76 AD in Italica, a Roman colony in Hispania Baetica, which is now in the Andalusia region of Spain. Hadrian's family gave rise to several soldiers who had renowned military careers. Hadrian's father was also an important soldier and provided a good education for his son. However, when Hadrian was only 10 years old, his father passed away. Following a Roman tradition, where a male guardian was to be appointed when a child's father died, Hadrian's father's cousin was chosen for this task. The name of Hadrian's new guardian was Trajan, who later became one of the key Roman emperors. Hadrian was educated in various subjects common among young aristocrats of the time. He was so keen on learning Greek literature that he was nicknamed Little Greek. Barely old enough, Hadrian accompanied Trajan on his military campaigns. Hadrian's initial years in the army were not significant, as the young man liked to lead a life with few responsibilities, preferring to go out hunting or enjoy other luxuries of civilian life. During Hadrian's second term as tribune, the frail and elderly reigning emperor, Nerva, adopted Trajan as his heir. When Nerva died in 98, Hadrian rushed and personally revealed to Trajan the news of his new position as emperor. With this, Hadrian was able to draw Trajan even closer, something that would bear good fruit for his life. Trajan spent most of his reign fighting in foreign wars. Therefore, his wife, Pompeia Plotina, played an important role in the empire's administration. Plotina, who had no children, had developed an affection for Hadrian, treating him as part of the family. By 114 ADS, Hadrian held a key position as governor of the important military province of Syria. There is no doubt that Hadrian had a relevant status during Trajan's reign. Still, there were no signs that he could become the imperial heir. When Trajan died in 117, he left a letter where he named Hadrian as the next emperor of Rome. Many senators were against Hadrian keeping this position. They claimed that Trajan's widow, Pompeia Plotina, had forged the letter to try to keep herself in power, perhaps ruling through Hadrian. The senators also objected to the idea of having a man with a foreign accent ruling the empire, as Hadrian retained the accent of his homeland in Spain. Hadrian was pressured by Plotina to marry the young Vibia Sabina. The marriage took place for purely political reasons, as Sabina did not seem to like the marriage from the start, and Hadrian preferred the company of men. Although their marriage could not be considered a success, his reign was nothing short of spectacular. When he assumed power, Hadrian immediately ordered the distribution of money to the people of Rome, guaranteeing all soldiers an extra bonus. He also canceled the debts of all people who had borrowed money from the imperial treasury. Hadrian also believed that it was important to be modest. For example, when he took part in military campaigns, he ate the same food as his soldiers, slept in common tents, and marched with them instead of on horseback. Although Hadrian was a talented poet and musician, he rarely displayed his gifts in public. Hadrian was also one of the most creative architects who ever breathed into this world. However, he refused to accept credit for many of his works. He even put other people's names on the buildings he designed, and only in recent years have historians discovered that Hadrian was responsible for the Pantheon, one of the most important buildings in the development of world architecture. Hadrian was a man with a passion for travel and aimed to personally visit the many lands and peoples of his empire. These far-reaching travels began with a visit to Gaul in the year 121 and would end 10 years later on his return to Rome in 131 AD. No other emperor saw much of his own empire as Hadrian. From the far west of Spain to the far east of the Turkish province of Pontus, from the far north of Britain to the far south of the Sahara Desert in Libya, Hadrian saw a little bit of everything. These trips were not simple tours. Hadrian sought to gather information about the varied problems of the provinces. Hadrian's construction projects are perhaps his most lasting legacy. He ordered the construction of a long defensive wall in Britannia to prevent invasion by the Picts from the north. This structure is the famous Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, and parts of it still stand. Hadrian established cities, built monuments, improved roads, and strengthened the infrastructure of provinces throughout the Balkan Peninsula, Egypt, Asia Minor, North Africa, and Greece. Hadrian's reign was marked by the absence of major military conflicts. War nearly broke out with Parthia around 121, but the threat was averted when Hadrian negotiated peace. In Judea, Hadrian's anti-Jewish persecutions led to the huge Jewish revolt between 132 and 135 AD. The crushing of the Jewish revolt resulted in Hadrian's decree, banning Jews from living in Palestine, whose name was changed to Syria-Palestine. Jerusalem was destroyed and rebuilt as a pagan city. Hadrian's marriage to Sabina produced no children. At age 60, Hadrian was in poor health. Knowing that death was near, Hadrian searched for an heir. He chose Antonius Pius, a highly respected senator, provided that Antonius, also childless, would adopt Hadrian's promising young nephew, Marcus Aurelius. The latter would become one of the most important Roman emperors. After spending agonizing months, Hadrian, a victim of illness, died at the age of 62 on July 10, 138 AD. His remains were transported to Rome and buried in Horti Domitiae, near his nearly completed mausoleum. After the completion of Hadrian's tomb in Rome in 139, his body was cremated and his ashes placed next to those of his wife Vibia Sabina. Thus ended the life of Emperor Hadrian, admired by many of his contemporary subjects, having left a valuable legacy in Roman history. Marcus Aurelius was one of the most respected emperors in Roman history. Considered the last of the 5 good emperors, his 4 predecessors were Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and Antonius Pius. Known for his philosophical interests, stoic personality, and commitment to governing the people, Marcus Aurelius was one of the most impressive figures of his time and remains relevant today. Marcus Aurelius was born on April 26, 121 AD, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, and was baptized as Marcus Annius Verus. His family was of Italian Hispanic Roman origin and, although financially secure, had no royal lineage. His father passed away when he was only 3 years old, and, consequently, young Marcus Aurelius was raised by his mother and grandparents. When the Roman Emperor Hadrian was on the verge of death, he was forced to choose a successor. Childless, he adopted a senator named Antoninus Pius. Since Antoninus also had no children, he adopted the 7-year-old Lucius Verus as the chief heir, and 17-year-old Marcus Aurelius as imperial prince. Marcus Aurelius changed his name to Marcus Aurelius Antoninus and worked hard alongside his adoptive father while learning the arts of ruling and public affairs. In 140 AD, Marcus Aurelius became consul, a position he held another 2 times in his life. Marcus Aurelius seemed to have a stable personal life with few eccentricities. In the year 145, he married Faustina, the youngest daughter of the Emperor Antoninus Pius. Together, they had many children over the years, although some did not live long. The best known are daughter Lucilla and son Commodus. When Antonius Pius died in 161, Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus became co-emperors, ruling the vast Roman Empire together. The rule of Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Vero was a troubled period in the Roman Republic. The war against Parthia lasted until 166, as the fierce Gauls attacked the northern Roman frontier. In addition, Germanic tribes were invading Roman provinces on the Danube. But something unexpected happened. Lucius Verus died suddenly in 169 from illness during a military campaign against the Parthians, leaving Marcus Aurelius as sole Roman emperor. Like many emperors, Marcus Aurelius spent most of his time addressing issues of law, such as petitions and legal disputes. But, unlike many of his predecessors, he was already proficient in imperial administration when he assumed power. During Marcus Aurelius's reign, the first pandemic with known impact on the Roman Empire occurred, possibly contracted and spread by soldiers returning from campaigns in the Near East. Known as the Antonine Plague, experts believed it was a plague of smallpox, although measles has also been suggested by modern scholars. The plague spread to Gaul and the legions along the Rhine River, causing the death of approximately 5 million, about 10% of the empire's population. Still, Marcus Aurelius guided the empire prosperously. The value of silver increased, and the economy strengthened. There is also evidence of trade between Rome and China of the Han Dynasty. Many Roman coins have also been found in India, indicating that the Romans imported Chinese silk through India, avoiding overland trade via the Silk Road along Persia. Following the Stoic philosophy he adopted, Marcus Aurelius was extremely careful in the theory and application of legislation. He was dubbed by his contemporaries as a most prudent and conscientiously just emperor. Marcus Aurelius showed ample respect for the Roman Senate and routinely asked permission to spend money, even though he did not need to do so as an absolute ruler of the empire. In a speech, Marcus Aurelius reminded the Senate that the imperial palace where he lived was not his own, but that of the people of Rome. As the most powerful man in the world at the time, Marcus Aurelius could have done anything he wanted, and few had the courage to challenge him on any issue. However, he proved to deserve the power he had. In his reign, the empire was guided by virtue and wisdom. Although he lost children, friends, and even his wife over the years, Marcus Aurelius remained true to his vision of a world ruled by natural and benign intelligence. There was no concept of tragedy in Aurelius's philosophy, but everything happened according to a natural order, and nothing could be construed as tragic. Marcus Aurelius devoted much of his military efforts to fighting the revolts in Germania, even traveling alongside the troops to supervise the battles. During the campaign between 170 and 180, Marcus Aurelius wrote his 12 books of meditations in Greek as a source for his own guidance and self-improvement. Aurelius's meditations are his true legacy to the world. The work is a private journal of the emperor's thoughts, written to encourage one to lead life to the best of their ability. Marcus Aurelius elected his son, Commodus, as co-governor in 177. Together, they fought against the empire's northern enemies. Marcus Aurelius also attempted to extend the borders of the empire through this conflict, but did not live long enough to see this mission completed. The great emperor Marcus Aurelius died at the age of 58 on March 17, 180 AD, of unknown causes, in his military barracks, probably in the province of Upper Pannonia, where Vienna, Austria is today. His death is considered the end of Pax Romana, a period that began during the reign of Emperor Augustus and lasted approximately 200 years. It was the golden age of Roman imperialism. When Marcus Aurelius died and his successor took over, the Roman world began an irreversible decline. Commodus had erratic behavior and a lack of political and military acumen. He was unable to hold the reins of power as his father had done. Marcus Aurelius acquired a reputation as a philosopher king during his lifetime. He was praised by the Roman historian Cassius Dio, who wrote, "From the early days of Marcus Aurelius as Antoninus's advisor to his last days as Roman emperor, he was always the same person and did not change a bit." This is how the life of Marcus Aurelius ended, one of the few rulers in world history who understood his role as a servant of the people, devoting his life to the personal development and prosperity of the Roman Empire.
Fortuna is a Roman goddess who symbolizes fortune, both the good and the bad kind. The goddess randomly disseminated luck among men. Therefore, one's fate could be defined by just pure arbitrariness. The god was sometimes depicted with a blindfold covering her eyes. That way, she could impartially distribute fortune among men. The deity was worshipped by several kinds of people, but those who relied on luck to conduct their activities stood out the most. Among them, we must emphasize the travelers, who were subject to all kinds of unexpected events, just like farmers who were subject to climatic changes and pests. Of course, she was also honored by those who enjoyed gambling and betting. The goddess was already worshipped in ancient Rome since the dawn of the empire, and a golden statue of the goddess was inside the dorm of the Roman emperors. As a rule of thumb, the slaves of Romans could not join most festivities dedicated to the gods, but the goddess of fortune was an exception, because she did not distinguish between nobles and slaves. Making use of the horn of plenty, also known as a cornucopia, the goddess spread abundance wherever she passed by. In Greek mythology, her equivalent would be the goddess Tyche, and her cult in the Hellenistic world grew wherever the future was more uncertain than usual. Fortuna is commonly depicted in the arts, holding a rudder, because as a helmswoman, she could change the course of someone's life. And, along with the cornucopia, the goddess was also commonly represented beside the wheel of fortune. Based on one's luck, this person could be on top and receive great gifts or deep down, afflicted by several ill events. The wheels symbolize fate's arbitrary nature. Men cannot fight against Fortuna's plans. They can only live in the best possible way with the luck that they were handed. After all, the wheel of fortune is always spinning, and it will only stop for good when the life of a man meets its end.
Janus is a major deity in Roman mythology. He is often depicted as having two faces, each pointing in opposite directions. Janus stares into both the future and the past, symbolizing his mastery over beginnings and endings. He is the son of the god Phoebus Apollo. Some versions say that Janus was born in the Greek region of Thessaly, but left for Latium, which is in present-day Italy. He was welcomed there by the mythical king Camese, with whom he shared power. Janus founded several cities, and according to some Roman myths, he welcomed the god Saturn after Jupiter had banished him from Greece. Saturn was the equivalent of the Titan Kronos in Greek mythology, and as a way of expressing his gratitude for being welcomed, the old god initiated the Golden Age of Man. During this period, people lived in a world of enormous happiness and abundance. Kronos also blessed Janus, endowing him with the ability to know the past and the future. Janus was the deity in charge of teaching men how to use boats and introduced the use of coins. After his existence among men ended, Janus was divinized. As a god, he became responsible for protecting doors and gates. Janus was depicted with two faces and a key in his hands. When opening a door, the god starts a new cycle, which can be a new harvest cycle or the passage from childhood to adulthood. He is also connected to the beginning and end of wars. During the Roman-Sabine conflict, the god prevented the Sabines from attacking Rome's armies by generating a fountain of boiling water to block the Sabines' path. The Romans repaid his protection by building several temples in his honor. The main one was shut during times of peace and only opened in times of war. Janus had a prominent position in Roman religious ceremonies. He was summoned at the beginning of each ritual, establishing a connection between the mortal and the divine. The Romans trusted that Janus's blessings were essential to secure a positive outcome in any new endeavor, be it agricultural, personal, or military. As a god related to transitions and the beginning of new cycles, the Romans named the first month of the year in honor of the god Janus. The month of January is the time when people try to put their end-of-year resolutions into practice and start a new prosperous cycle with the blessing of the god Janus.
The ancient Romans conquered one of history's greatest empires. However, this empire was not built peacefully. Relying on their highly disciplined military system, the Romans fought wars against many kingdoms of different cultures and traditions. Many peoples of warrior cultures organized armies to fight the Latin invaders, but they failed to stand up to the Roman Republic, which seemed forever unsatisfied with the growing number of territories and cities under their rule. But Rome wasn't the only military and economic power on the rise. In North Africa, the great city of Carthage remained steady and sovereign in the control of the Mediterranean Sea trade routes. Carthage had been founded around 814 BC by Phoenician settlers, and within a short time, the city grew in strength and splendor. Over time, the Carthaginians founded other cities in Sicily and Sardinia and ruled the territories of other peoples who inhabited the African coastal region. The control that the Carthaginians exercised over the Mediterranean Sea greatly affected the progress of the Roman conquest, and soon armed conflicts between the two powers started to happen. Such conflicts fueled several wars, known as the Punic Wars. The First Punic War took place between 264 and 241 BC. It was a maritime conflict for the most part, which forced the Romans to build a large fleet of ships to confront the Carthaginian warships. During the First Punic War, land battles were fought on the island of Sicily, a rather important strategic point for the control of trade in the Mediterranean Sea. The war ended with the Roman victory at the Battle of the Aegates Islands, fought between the Roman and the Carthaginian navy fleets. The Carthaginians were expelled from Sicily and other newly conquered territories. To ensure control of their borders, the Carthaginians were forced to sign a treaty recognizing Rome's right to lead the Mediterranean trade. The peace treaty between Rome and Carthage was tainted by a never-ending distrust between the two peoples. The Roman Senate always imposed new demands on taxes and territories, something that humiliated the proud Carthaginian people. Then, the great Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca focused his efforts on invading the Iberian Peninsula and conquering new lands for Carthage. Hamilcar had taken part in the last quarrels of the First Punic War, and, after the end of the war, he participated in the Mercenary War, where he fought a rebellion of mercenaries that ravaged Carthage's allied cities. Hamilcar defeated several Iberian tribes and took control of vast territories rich in silver and tin, adding a new source of income in metals and wood to Carthage. His name was exalted with grand esteem, something ill interpreted by the Romans. General Hamilcar looked at Rome with major contempt and instructed his eldest son never to trust the word of Roman senators and generals. Hamilcar's son was a determined and brave youngling, whose name will become known as one of history's greatest generals and military strategists, Hannibal Barca. The surname Barca can be translated as Ray, quite apt for the man Hannibal would become. In some versions, it's said that at the age of 9, Hannibal participated in a ritual alongside his father. During the ritual, Hannibal dipped one of his hands in a basin with the blood of a sacrificial animal, and as he raised his fist, young Hannibal took an oath in which he said, "I swear so soon as age will permit, I will use fire and steel to arrest the destiny of Rome." During his childhood, Hannibal studied writing and philosophy with Greek teachers and learned about the great military feats of Alexander the Great, while also learning military strategy from a Spartan teacher. The stories of Alexander's conquests were an inspiration for Hannibal to study battle tactics, quite unusual and risky, but which would be difficult for enemies to predict. The privileged education he had in his youth made Hannibal a man educated in different subjects, something that would be very useful in his military career. But an unexpected event changed Hannibal's life forever. Hannibal's father, Hamilcar, died abruptly in 228 BC during a battle against Iberian rebels. Some years after his death, Hannibal was chosen to take the major role of army commander. At 26, Hannibal was a cunning commander revered by his soldiers. Many admired Hannibal's resemblance to his late father. Some veteran soldiers even exalted Hannibal by saying, "He's Hamilcar in his youth, the same energy in his face, the same fire in his eyes." Hannibal extended his father's military campaigns against the Iberian tribes and defeated several enemy armies, conquering new cities and spoils for Carthage. Hannibal's reputation was already spreading among his people and reached the Roman Senate, which started to closely follow the young general's footsteps. To secure a monitoring point on the Iberian Peninsula, the Romans established a diplomatic alliance with the city of Sagunto, located where the province of Valencia in Spain is today. This strategic maneuver from the Romans was taken as a major insult by the Carthaginians, since Rome was claiming territories beyond the borders established in the old peace agreement. This offense against Carthage enraged General Hannibal, and he attacked the city of Sagunto. After an 8-month siege, the city was taken. The flames of war between Rome and Carthage were ignited again. Rome sent a political delegation to Carthage and demanded the return of Sagunto, along with a large sum of silver for the offense. But the Carthaginians had had enough of adding to the Roman resources. The Roman emissaries received an unexpected and bitter response. The Carthaginians chose war. After taking advantage of Hannibal's great popularity, the Carthaginian government urged the people and soldiers to start a new war against Rome. The Second Punic War began. For Hannibal, the long dreamed for chance to fight the Romans and honor the memory of his father had come. But he knew that Rome was not weak. A minor error could put everything to lose. Hannibal knew that the shortest way to Rome would be by crossing the Mediterranean Sea, landing with his troops in Italy. But many months were needed to build new boats. The Roman fleet was too strong to be challenged. To make matters worse, the Romans were already organizing their legions to move against Carthage. This invasion would be made by land through Spain and by sea from the island of Sicily. Hannibal then took one of the most daring decisions in history, to march against Rome across Spain and southern Gaul. Hannibal quickly assembled a large army, which included many horses, camels, and 40 war elephants that would have to be taken through uneven and unreceptive terrain. The Long March began in late spring of 218 BC. Hannibal organized deployments of soldiers to protect the Iberian Peninsula during this absence, leaving Hasdrubal, his younger brother, in command of the troops. Even at the head of an army of more than 90,000 warriors, Hannibal knew that this would not be enough to defeat the legions and reach Rome. Then, he sent messengers to recruit Iberian and Gaul mercenaries. Despite their mutual contempt of Rome, many tribes refused to send soldiers to support Hannibal's cause. After all, if the Carthaginian general failed in his attack, the Roman response would be quick and deadly. Nevertheless, about 40,000 Gauls joined Hannibal's army as they passed through Gaul. The rumors of the attack on Rome spread quickly. When the Romans learned of the advance of such a massive army, they readily established a line of defense and marched across the Mediterranean coast in the hope of stopping Hannibal's army in its tracks. To avoid a conflict that could greatly diminish his number of men, Hannibal changed his route and climbed the valley of the Rhone River, where he got new Gaul supporters. Now Hannibal had no chance of turning back. The Romans would chase him if he tried to retreat. There was no alternative but to forward by a new route. Hannibal's determination remained unshaken, but he was about to encounter the biggest obstacles in his military campaign, the Alps, a vast mountain range so high that they spent much of the year covered with snow due to the low temperatures. Even before a massive challenge, Hannibal did not step back and started what would be one of the most famous and dangerous journeys in history. The air grew colder as the autumn days passed, and Hannibal Barca felt restless in his military camp. Hannibal knew he needed to be quick to organize his risky march into the mountains. If it took too long, winter would come, and the passages would be blocked by snow. The Romans wouldn't stand still during the winter either, and they would certainly raise another army to fight Hannibal. Time would be a decisive factor in this war. To increase the chances of survival in his army, Hannibal hired some Gauls who inhabited the mountainous region and knew the treacherous passages that would be traversed. The Gauls warned Hannibal that it was too late to make the crossing, as winter would hit the men when they were on the march, but the Carthaginian leader was willing to take the risks, and Hannibal's long and torturous march through the Alps began in 218 BC. We don't know the routes used by the Carthaginian army because the Alps are full of passages, and there are no precise historical records of which one was chosen by the Gaul guides. The weather conditions and the mountainous terrain also make the work of archaeologists looking for concrete evidence difficult. One of the most accepted theories is that the Carthaginian army crossed the region known as the Little St. Bernard Pass, 2,188 meters high. Nowadays, it is on the border between France and Italy. Anyway, it is a great fact that a great army composed by Carthaginian, Numidian, Libyan, Iberian, and Gaul warriors was able to cross the inhospitable terrain. Besides the soldiers, there were hundreds of combat animals and cargo to carry the army supplies, such as food and material for the camps. But there was another danger in the mountains. Although the Alpine terrain was not conducive to the proliferation of life, some hostile Gaul tribes inhabited the lower, flatter regions of the mountains. Hannibal's army fell into an ambush by one of these tribes during the march. It suffered great losses, mainly cargo animals, as the mountain barbarians wanted to steal the weapons and armor carried. They were attacked by the tribe of the Cavares. Hannibal was able to quickly organize a line of defense and drove the enemies away, but that episode shook the morale of the Carthaginian army. 5 months had passed since Hannibal had left the Iberian Peninsula for Rome, and now many of his soldiers were dying in the Alps from fatigue, cold, hunger, and disease. It was late October, and snow was constantly falling on the army. and the situation was not good for Hannibal. To motivate his soldiers, Hannibal used his oratory talent and convinced his men that they were already close to the Padane Plain, a region to the west and east of Italy where the river Po passes. Motivated by the need to keep moving and the hope of quickly reaching flat ground, the soldiers continued their march, but the difficulties were still far from over. Many passages were blocked by large rocks or snow slides. Faced with this enormous challenge, Hannibal will have said one of his most famous phrases, "I shall either find a way or make one." Proving his genius, Hannibal ordered the soldiers to build great fires under the rocks and pour many liters of vinegar or wine on top. This would weaken the rocks, allowing the soldiers to break them more easily using common tools. Still on the long march, Hannibal and his army cross an extremely difficult point in the southern Alps, where much of the road is made up of steep cliffs and narrow trails. Many men and animals lost their balance and fell to their deaths amidst sharp rocks and freezing snow. After 16 endless days for the Carthaginian army, they finally reached the north of the Italian peninsula. But Hannibal and his soldiers had paid a high price for their passage through the Alps, losing almost half of their troops due to harsh weather conditions. An estimated 33,000 people died, including soldiers, horses, elephants, and pack mules. Hannibal organized a camp on the Padane Plain, where he allowed his soldiers to have a well-deserved rest. But he knew that the Romans quickly learned of his location and sent emissaries to seek new allies among the Gaul tribes of the region. Because they were closer to Rome, the Gaul tribes of the Padane Plain were forced to live under Roman rule, paying taxes and obeying the demands of their more powerful neighbors. This caused great discontent among the Gauls, and many began to join Hannibal's army. When the Romans were informed of the position of the Carthaginian army at the gates of Rome, they panicked because of the surprise. The Romans had lost track of Hannibal since he had changed his route towards the Rhone River. They believed he was still in Gaul or had returned to the Iberian Peninsula. Crossing the Alps during the winter was unimaginable. It was considered madness by most military commanders, but not for Hannibal Barca, who had now reached Italian soil. The Roman Senate quickly summoned the legions on the Iberian Peninsula and the island of Sicily, two routes where a Carthaginian attack was expected. The Roman legion situated in the Iberian Peninsula under the command of General Cornelius Scipio was the first to arrive in Italy, using many ships to transport the legionaries as quickly as possible. The first conflict between the Carthaginians and the Romans took place in the Battle of Ticinus, a battle fought essentially between the cavalry of the two armies, which ended with a great Carthaginian victory. During the battle, Cornelius Scipio was seriously wounded and survived thanks to his son, who rescued him on the battlefield. Cornelius Scipio's son had the same name as his father, but would quickly become known as Scipio Africanus. Hannibal's victory won even more Gaul supporters for his army, which now had the numbers needed for the siege against Rome. In December 218 BC, the Battle of the Trebia took place between Hannibal's army and the Roman legions from Sicily. The battle took place near the river Trebia, where the Italian province of Aemilia is now located. Like all great generals, Hannibal knew how to use the terrain to his advantage and planned an ambush against the Roman army. Hannibal had many Numidian knights, a people from North Africa who specialized in quick attacks with light cavalry. Hannibal ordered the Numidian cavalry to attack the Roman camp even before dawn. Once the legions responded to the attack, the Numidians were to retreat and lure the enemy near the river Trebia, where there would be Carthaginian troops hiding amongst the trees and bushes. Surprised and out of time to make the first meal of the day, the sleepy Romans reacted to the Numidian attack and took the bait from Hannibal. They were ambushed in a muddy terrain with little room for Roman formations. Some Roman troops tried to cross the river to reach Hannibal's camp, but the water made it difficult to move, and they became easy targets for the Carthaginian slingers and spearmen. The Roman army retreated to Hannibal's superior strategy, and the survivors fled in disarray, spreading the word that they were facing an unusual and extremely dangerous enemy. News of the Carthaginian victory did not take long to reach Rome, where fear spread rapidly among the population. But the Battle of the Trebia also had a price on Hannibal. After the battle, the Carthaginian army marched in a kind of pestilent swamp, which made many soldiers sick. Even Hannibal fell victim to a terrible infection in his right eye. Reports say that Hannibal was suffering from fever and pain, and that his eye was almost blind. Hannibal removed the damaged tissue and burnt it at the stake, a gesture that was seen with great admiration by his followers. There were several conflicts between the Carthaginian and Roman forces. Hannibal won the battles without suffering great loss, as in the Battle of Lake Trasimeno in the spring of 217 BC. Hannibal slowly advanced his army through Italian territory, but the Roman resistance was admirable. The war between Rome and Carthage was far from over. Hannibal Barca's invasion of the Italian peninsula had already cost many lives, but the Romans did not accept the surrender and continued to recruit new soldiers to defend Rome. Hannibal was forced to follow a route in eastern Italy to avoid rough terrain and stay away from the Roman legions. After months of stalemate, the fateful Battle of Cannae took place on August 2nd, 216 BC, a battle so brutal and disastrous that it is sometimes dubbed the Battle of Annihilation. To defend her city and defeat all invaders, Rome assembled the largest Roman army ever seen, with over 86,000 men against Hannibal's 56,000. Even at a numerical disadvantage, Hannibal drew up a risky plan where his troops were to surround the Roman legions and attack the enemy army's flanks. The battle began with Hannibal's initiative, using his heavy cavalry to defeat the Roman cavalry without difficulty, unprotecting the flanks and rear of the legions. The Romans continued to advance, believing in their superiority in numbers and their traditional tactics. They did not realize that the Carthaginian troops were slowly forming a half-moon around them. The Romans were caught in a classic pincer formation. They were punished on all sides, with no chance of retreating, as Hannibal's cavalry was in the rear. The result was a massacre. About 50,000 Romans were killed, 20,000 captured as prisoners. The Carthaginian army lost approximately 6,000 warriors, a low price for the huge victory against Rome. The Battle of Cannae was the greatest defeat in the history of the Roman Empire. Today, it is still studied by soldiers from all over the world. After that battle, nothing could stop Hannibal's advance against Rome. The Roman Senate ordered the city gates to close, but Hannibal did not seize the opportunity and decided to advance cautiously through Roman territory. He probably feared the existence of another Roman army hiding and ready to execute an ambush. Faced with Hannibal's indecision, one of his important commanders, called Maharbal, criticized the Carthaginian general, saying, "No man is blessed with all gifts of Baal. You, Hannibal, know how to win a victory, but you don't know how to use it." The Romans wasted no time and made a mass summons. They quickly created armies and whenever possible attacked Hannibal's camps, avoiding direct confrontation with the Carthaginian army. To make matters worse, Hannibal began to lose the support of the Carthaginian government, for many years had passed since Hannibal left for war. Hannibal constantly sent emissaries to Carthage asking for new reinforcements and supplies. But the fight against Rome was exhausting the city's coffers, and the response was not always positive. New battles were fought, and Hannibal conquered smaller cities like Capua and Taranto. But with each passing day, his military campaign was becoming unsustainable in the face of the incredible Roman ability to reorganize itself after each defeat. After almost 15 years of fighting Rome, Hannibal was called back to Carthage and withdrew from Italy in 203 BC. There are different reasons why the Carthaginian government demanded Hannibal's return. One is that the Carthaginian Senate feared that if Hannibal conquered Rome, he would advance against Carthage and begin a new empire. But the most likely reason was that Carthage needed Hannibal and his combat experience to be defended, as the Roman general Scipio Africanus had landed in Africa and was attacking and plundering the cities near Carthage. Hannibal already knew the fame of Scipio Africanus. According to some sources, he had also been in the terrible Battle of Cannae, one of the few survivors of that conflict. Scipio Africanus had gained experience over time and represented a great danger, as he liked to use unexpected tactics on the battlefield, and no enemy could not manipulate him. Although Hannibal and Scipio admired each other, the confrontation between the two great generals was inevitable. In 202 BC, the famous Battle of Zama was fought. One day before the battle, Hannibal and Scipio organized a formal meeting where they discussed possible terms of peace, but could not reach an agreement that would please both parties. The battle began with an attack by Hannibal using his war elephants. The elephants roared across the plain between the two armies, a sight that would frighten any living being. But Scipio was prepared and ordered his army to blow hundreds of trumpets of war. The deafening noise caused the elephants to panic and stop. Some even turned around and advanced against the lines of the Carthaginian army. Few elephants reached the Roman army, but they were eliminated when they were hit by dozens of spears thrown by the legionaries. The attack of the Carthaginian elephants was a failure, and to Hannibal's surprise, his cavalry was being dominated by the cavalry mercenaries hired by the Romans. What was now left was the brutal hand-to-hand combat by soldiers on foot. Even Hannibal's veteran soldiers couldn't override the disciplined formations of Scipio's legions. While the infantry fought, the Roman cavalry attacked the Carthaginian flanks and rear, spreading panic among the Carthaginians, who quickly dispersed. The battle was over, and the great Hannibal Barca had been defeated. Hannibal returned to Carthage, where he declared that Carthage was defenseless and that they should accept any conditions imposed by the Romans to try to preserve their autonomy and protect their citizens. Scipio made numerous demands on the Carthaginians. Among them, Carthage could not wage war against any people without Rome's prior permission, nor could they train new war elephants or build a new naval fleet. Although these terms weakened Carthage enormously, they were accepted without much resistance by the Carthaginian Senate. After more than 20 years, the Second Punic War officially ended. Hannibal was about 46 years old when the war ended. In the following years, he had a political career where he was chief magistrate. 7 years passed, and rumors began to emerge that Hannibal was coming into contact with Antiochus III the Great, king of the Seleucid Empire, who dominated almost the entire Middle East and was an enemy of Rome. The Romans demanded that Carthage deliver Hannibal for his actions. But Hannibal went into exile, living in many cities such as Tyre, Antioch, Ephesus, and Crete. Always on the move, Hannibal still could not avoid the Romans, who bribed or threatened any kingdom that dared to welcome his hated enemy. Hannibal spent his last years of life in a city called Larissa, situated in the ancient region of northwest Asia Minor, where Turkey is today. Hannibal passed away between 183 and 181 BC, at about age 63 of age. It is believed that he committed suicide by poisoning, as the Romans would have found him again, and he was already tired of running away. Before he died, Hannibal would have left a letter where it said, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." the impact that Hannibal had on Roman culture would continue to be felt for many centuries. This figure caused so much terror that it gave rise to the phrase, "Hannibal is at the gates." This phrase is still used to express the anticipation of a calamity. The Romans felt a reluctant admiration for Hannibal, even building some statues of the Carthaginian general. The Second Punic War also showed the Romans that they would have to improve their war tactics. Using innovative military strategies could accelerate the process of conquering new territories. The story of Hannibal Barca has been retold in several books, films, and documentaries, and his life is full of glorious moments which are still remembered with admiration. Hannibal's personality and willpower are an inspiration to many who consider him an example of leadership and rebellion against an oppressive force. It is safe to say that if Hannibal had conquered Rome, he would have changed the course of history forever.
Mars was the Roman god of war. His counterpart in Greek mythology was Ares. But Mars' prestige in Rome was far greater than that of his counterpart in ancient Greece. Mars was the son of Jupiter and Juno, the gods who reigned supreme over the universe. The Roman god of war was usually depicted as a mature, strong, bearded man. His appearance was more majestic than that of Ares, usually depicted as a young, impulsive god. The Roman god roamed the battlefields alongside the demons Virtus and Honor. He favored those who fought with honor. The god Ares was accompanied by his sons Phobos and Deimos, entities representing fear and terror. While Ares was a despised god among the others in Olympus, being hardly worshipped among men due to his violent and cruel nature, Mars was revered in Rome. According to Roman myths, he was the father of the twins Romulus and Remus. The former was the founder of the city of Rome. Mars had Venus as a lover, the goddess of love, equivalent to the goddess of Aphrodite in Greek mythology. In early Roman cults, Mars was essentially an agricultural deity. But, according to Roman society, he gradually developed and expanded territorially through conquests. The role of the god also changed over time, and his warlike attributes became more valued. The god came to be seen as a warrior and protected the Romans in their conquests. The shield of Mars was kept in the Roman Forum under the care of priests. Mars was a much worshipped god in Rome. After each victory of the legions, the Romans honored the god with feasts in his honor. Emperor Octavian Augustus presented Mars as an avenging god, justifying his persecution of the senators who murdered Julius Caesar, who was his uncle and adoptive father. Although his cult as god of war grew in importance, Mars never ceased his role as an agrarian deity. As protector of the crops, he was honored, and the month of March was consecrated in his honor. The name of this month originates from the name Mars, and at that time, it was the first month of the year and the beginning of spring. With the end of winter, the Roman legions were able to march under the god's protection towards glory. On March 14th, the city of Rome was adorned for the great festival that took place on the Field of Mars. Religious, cultural, and sporting events were celebrated there in honor of the god. The god was the second most important of the Roman pantheon, second only to Jupiter, equivalent to Zeus. Due to its blood-red color, the planet Mars was named after this god, and the protector of Rome was thus eternalized among the stars.
Rome could never have built a mighty empire without its remarkable legions. These professional soldiers conquered territories in Europe, Africa, and Asia, always in the name of Roman glory. Today, we'll learn about the main weapons and tools that allowed Roman legionaries to be considered the most efficient warriors of the ancient world. The pilum was one of the main weapons used by the Roman legionaries. It was a heavy spear, approximately 2.5 meters long, whose purpose was to be thrown like a dart at enemy troops. When the pilum was thrown at the same time by an entire unit, it produced a devastating downpour of missiles that destroyed the enemy's morale. The intended result was to eliminate or severely wound the opponent. If the opposing warriors used their shields for protection, the long, sharp tip of the pilum would often get caught in the shield, causing it to become too heavy to handle properly. Depending on the situation, the pilum was also used in hand-to-hand combat. It could be deployed as an extremely effective short spear that pierced leather armor or chainmail. The Roman short sword, known as the gladius, was probably the weapon that contributed most to the Roman Empire's relentless expansion. Early Roman swords were similar to those of the Greeks and known as xiphos. Starting in the 3rd century BC, the Romans adopted a sword based on the weapons of the Celtibrians in Hispania at the end of the Punic Wars. It was known in Latin as the gladius hispaniensis. As a rule, the gladius was a secondary weapon used after the legionaries threw the heavy darts known as pilum. According to the Roman tactical doctrine, the shield was to be used to cover the whole body as much as possible, while the gladius was meant to attack with piercing and devastating blows. With these tactics, the Romans defeated different enemy infantry, including the dreaded Greek hoplites. To sustain the Roman Empire's strength and ability to expand, the soldiers' battle tactics and equipment had to be constantly updated. Since the gladius was too short to be used by the cavalry, the Romans adopted a longer sword known as the spatha. It appeared in the Roman Empire around the 1st century AD. The spatha was used in the legions by auxiliaries, presumably Gauls, and became a standard heavy infantry weapon. Thus, the gladius came into use as a light infantry weapon. Cavalry soldiers began to use the spatha given its length. It remained popular throughout the migration period at the end of the Roman Empire. Over time, the spatha became the sword of knights in the High Middle Ages. The pugio was a dagger used by Roman soldiers as a sidearm. It is likely that the pugio was designed as an auxiliary weapon, but its exact purpose for soldiers remains unknown. The Roman pugio was a double-bladed dagger, whose blade was leaf-shaped and longer than 20 centimeters. The Romans started using the pugio after the Celtibrian Wars, which took place in the Iberian Peninsula in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. Due to the detailed ornamentation on the scabbards and handles, some think that the pugio's purpose was solely symbolic. In other words, it was an element of the soldier's prestige and status. The pugio was part of the several conspiracies in the empire's history. That is why it is considered the favorite weapon of traitors. As the centuries passed, the Roman army adapted to new enemies and ways of fighting. The heavy pilum was replaced by a long spear, and, as a throwing weapon, Roman soldiers adopted a new plumbata. By 300 AD, the plumbata was massively adopted by the late Roman armies, and then by the Eastern Roman armies. The plumbata was affectionately nicknamed by the legionaries as Little Barbs of Mars, in reference to the Roman god of war. The plumbata was composed of an iron tip, a lead weight, and a feathered wooden shaft. After being thrown upwards, the lead weight made the dart fall on the opponents at an angle of almost 90 degrees. It was very effective for wounding unprotected body parts, especially against lightly shielded opponents and horses. The Scorpio was a twisting siege machine, used as a piece of field artillery by the Roman army. The Scorpio was an extremely accurate and effective machine. Enemies were often terrified by its presence on the battlefield. The projectiles fired by the Scorpio flew at a distance of up to 500 meters. Some smaller projectiles, with ranges up to 200 meters, were used to destroy enemy formations at closer distances. As a rule, a legion had 60 Scorpiones. The Scorpiones were usually placed on a hill, under the protection of a legion. The bulk and speed of the projectiles allowed them to penetrate the shields and neutralize the enemy. The complexity of the construction, and in particular the torsion springs, made the Scorpio very sensitive to any variation in temperature or humidity, which limited its use. The onager was a Roman catapult. It was used mainly as a siege weapon to destroy the walls and fortifications of cities. The basic structure consisted of a large wooden frame mounted on the ground. The projectile was fired by a wooden arm propelled by the force of twisting ropes made of tendons or horsehair. The onager was a large weapon, weighing up to 4 tons. Therefore, it had to be mounted at the battle site. It could cause massive devastation by destroying enemy fortifications and setting cities on fire. It could also be used to bombard enemy troops using smaller stones. The Romans began using the onager in the 3rd and 2nd century BC, mainly against the Greek city of Syracuse, and also during the Roman siege of Carthage in 146 BC. The lorica segmentata was a kind of armor mainly used by the Roman Empire in the late 1st century BC, being set aside in the mid-3rd century AD. The armor was composed of iron plates joined together with overlapping leather strips. These leather strips ensured the strength and flexibility of the lorica segmentata, allowing the Roman soldier to move freely. He could use his shield and sword without the armor hindering him too much. The lorica segmentata was also much lighter than the lorica hamata. It had an older mesh coat, but one that remained throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. We don't know the exact reason, but despite its good qualities, the lorica segmentata was abandoned by the Romans, probably due to the high cost of manufacturing and difficult maintenance. The scutum was among the main items in a Roman legionnaire's arsenal. It was widely used between the 5th century BC and at the end of the 3rd century AD, when rectangular shields disappeared and became oval or round. The scutum was originally oval, but was modified to become a rectangular shield. The scutum had 3 wooden layers, properly fitted together to ensure the shield's convexity. The boards were connected externally by glue, and then additionally covered with a layer of canvas and calfskin. The ends of the shield were metallic, protecting it from blows. The most spectacular battle formation associated with the scutum was the testudo, used in defensive and offensive operations to protect soldiers from darts and arrows. To conquer new lands on behalf of the Roman Empire, Roman legionaries marched between territories. At the end of a day's march, it was necessary to build a secure camp. To do this, each soldier had a survival kit. The luggage included spare clothing, food rations, a pot, a short shovel, a handmill for grinding corn, and 2 wooden stakes to help build a protective fence. To make the legions as flexible as possible, soldiers were required to carry bags with cooking utensils and personal hygiene items, as well as string and bandages. It is estimated that a Roman legionary could carry about 50 kilos, divided between personal luggage, weapons, and armor. He could march 30 kilometers a day, carrying all this additional weight.
In the past, men and women were imprisoned and sold as commodities, a time when freedom was a luxury enjoyed only by a few. People without freedom, if they were lucky, would end up as servants in the house of noble families. Others had to do the hard work in plantations or work in mines and quarries. But some were forced to take up arms to defend their lives. These brave fighters were known as gladiators. The gladiators were slaves. The vast majority were warriors captured on the battlefields. These warriors were proud men with a strong character. This made many difficult to control. They were a risk to the families who bought them. But not all of them were trained warriors. There were also various kinds of criminals, and these even included indebted people who failed to pay what they owed. Many slave buyers avoided this sort of problem. The solution was to give another purpose to these unfortunate people, and the fighting began in the arenas. The fight between gladiators began very early in Roman history and was already present in previous cultures. It was a funeral event to mark the death of someone important. The first battles were organized in simple wooden arenas. Usually, the fight was unarmed, very similar to the boxing of today. However, this quickly bored the spectators. Weapons began to be used in the arena, creating much more savage and cruel results. The name gladiator comes from the gladius, a typical Roman sword, used mainly by legionnaires in military campaigns. The gladius was a short, heavy sword, designed to be used in stabbing motions. It could cause great damage when used in a sharp blow. As time went by, the gladiators began to use various weapons, creating greater diversity in the fighting. Men known as lannistas were responsible for buying the gladiators, feeding them, and providing them space for training. They created academies known as ludus gladiatoris. To increase their chances in the arena, the gladiators were required to undergo rigorous daily training, which consisted of weightlifting, running, and of course, weapons training. The diet was essentially vegetarian. Meat was consumed only once or twice a week. This food was expensive and inaccessible to a large part of the population. To compensate, the gladiators consumed a lot of carbohydrates and calcium. They even drank bone powder mixed with water to strengthen their own bone structure. They were undoubtedly strong men, but they did not have the appearance of athletes with a definite musculature. Most of them accumulated fat to increase their chances of surviving the cutting of their weapon. Gladiators were allowed to train only with wooden weapons. They were only allowed to use deadly weapons before entering the arena. Their armor was basically ornamental. It exposed the most important parts of the body. The training was guided by an experienced gladiator who was skilled enough to have guaranteed his retirement or buy his own freedom. He was given the position of doctore. He was responsible for supervising all training, teaching fighting techniques, and applying punishment. The gladiators were divided into different categories according to the equipment they used. Among them was the murmillo, which used a large fish-shaped helmet similar. As a weapon, he used a short sword and a regular shield. There was also the retiarius, which used a fishing net accompanied by a trident. The net was used to try to trap the weapon or helmet of the opposing gladiator. The trident, in turn, was responsible for the mortal blow. The thrax was a curved sword with an exuberant helmet, with feathers and horsehair. The provocateurs often used spears, and their specialty was fighting against animals. These categories also determined the types of combat for which gladiator would be fit. The fights were organized for the gladiators to fight in duels, battles between opposing groups, or each for himself. There were few rules during the fights. The duel between high-level gladiators was accompanied by 1 or 2 judges in the arena. The fights rarely lasted more than 10 or 15 minutes, and the gladiators were instructed to perform well, even if it cost them their lives. This was evident in the famous phrase, "Hail Caesar, we who are about to die salute you." At the moment of his death, the gladiator should show bravery and accept his destiny without begging for life or weeping. This was seen as a good death. Although rare, there were women gladiators, and their participation in the fighting was a special event. As if it were not enough to face another armed and trained warriors, the gladiators could have the misfortune of fighting wild animals in the arena. Tigers, lions, bulls, and even elephants were used in the dreadful fighting. To survive, it was necessary to have more than just willpower. Despite all this danger, the gladiators could buy their own freedom if they could accumulate enough money, an opportunity that other kinds of slaves rarely had. The lannistas made high stakes for money, putting their best gladiators in the arena. If the gladiator emerged victoriously, he would receive a small share of that money. The most famous gladiators could even accumulate a fortune, and many continued to fight even after buying their freedom. Not all fights ended in death. In smaller shows, the gladiators could stop the fight at the first injury or stage a fake death. One of the ways of staging a death was to fall to the ground, pretending to have been mortally wounded. Then they would pierce a small bladder containing the blood of some animal, creating the impression that the blood belonged to the gladiator. The life of the gladiator could also be spared by the figure of greater authority present in the spectacle. Normally, he was the organizer of the event, or even the Roman emperor himself. This was done with a gesture using the thumb of the right hand. When turned up, the gladiator was spared and would live to fight another day. When turned down, that dictated the end of his life on the sands of the arena. There were many arenas throughout the Roman Empire, but none compared to the Colosseum. The Colosseum was a monumental structure. It was the largest amphitheater ever built and could accommodate about 65,000 spectators. Many other types of events took place at the Colosseum, plays, and the trial of criminals. But the gladiators were the main attraction, an event eagerly awaited by the entire Roman population. It was something very similar to today's great sports championships. Tickets were sold many days in advance. They became more expensive as the day of the fights approached. At the Colosseum, impressive fights were organized. The gladiators reproduced epic battles. In some situations, the amphitheater arena was even flooded to mimic naval battles. Many gladiators became legends in the arena, being represented in paintings and sculptures of the time. The fights were the main subject of conversations in the streets of Rome. All this fame and the chance to gain wealth attracted even free men to fight in the arenas. Among these men, even a Roman emperor was carried away by the ambition to feel on his skin what it was like to be a gladiator. His name was Commodus. Despite his apparent courage, Commodus did not fight fairly. He faced only wounded animals or forced his opponent gladiator to use a wooden sword. All this popularity led many nobles in Rome to organize exhibitions and fights in order to gain fame and even divert the attention of the population from conflicts in city politics. Obviously, many gladiators were not happy to spend the rest of their lives fighting to satisfy the ambitions of rich men and the bloodthirst of the Roman population. One of these gladiators was Spartacus. In 73 BC, Spartacus, along with 70 of his training companions, managed to escape from the training center where he was prisoner. He then attacked other academies, freeing many gladiators and other slaves, forming an army of about 40,000 rebels. The rebellion ended when Spartacus's army was defeated by the Roman legions. But this episode caused a deep wound in Roman pride, and the gladiators started to be seen with reluctant respect. Gladiator fighting continued for many centuries. They were officially closed only in 536 AD, as they no longer attracted large numbers of spectators. They started to be seen as a barbaric spectacle, also due to the influence of Christianity in Europe. The history of the gladiators is glorious and tragic. They will be eternally remembered as the heroes of the arena.
Saint Sebastian is among the most worshipped and respected saints of the Christian faith. He was born in Narbonne in present-day France in the late 3rd century AD, but was educated in Milan, Italy, and it was here that he first met Christianity. During this period, Christians were persecuted and ostracized by the Roman Empire. Sebastian felt a great calling and accepted the Christian faith. He joined the Roman army. Given his physical strength, together with his sharp intelligence, he quickly stood out among the conscripts. Sebastian learned to maneuver between complicated military structures and quickly rose through the ranks. He soon became captain of the Praetorian Guard, a position of great power and prestige under the emperors Diocletian and Maximian. He was highly regarded for both his military ability and his commitment to duty. Using his rank, Sebastian secretly helped many Christians. He would warn communities of any potential persecution, help free prisoners, and, on a few occasions, used his own money to help those in need. He introduced the Christian faith to several of his fellow soldiers. some of whom were moved by the message and accepted baptism. Sebastian was ready for the challenges to come, aware that eventually he would have to make a choice that could cost him everything. A Christian prisoner under torture, looking for relief from his agony, mentioned Sebastian's name as one of his protectors. This news quickly reached a high-ranking officer who, driven by jealousy and suspicion of Sebastian's quick success, took the information directly to Diocletian. The emperor, well known for his distaste for Christians, called Sebastian to his palace. Before the imperial throne, Sebastian was questioned directly about his faith. Rather than deny it or try to protect himself, Sebastian remained steadfast and openly admitted his devotion to Christianity. Diocletian felt betrayed and outraged by this. The emperor was livid and ordered Sebastian to be taken to an open field and tied to a pole. He would be put to death as an example to all. The Christian faith would not be accepted within the high ranks of the Roman army. Archers were called in, and Sebastian was shot through with a barrage of arrows. He was left for dead, his bloodied body a painful vision under the blazing sun. Yet, as night fell, a miracle happened. A Christian woman named Irene, having come to retrieve Sebastian's body and provide him with a proper burial, stumbled upon him still breathing. She carefully took him home with the help of others and tended to his many wounds. Sebastian fought between life and death for weeks, but his resilience and faith, along with Irene's loving care, enabled him to recover. Rather than fleeing or hiding after his recovery, Sebastian, powered by an undaunted bravery, decided to face Diocletian again. He appeared before the emperor, scolding him for his acts of cruelty against the Christians. This bold resurfacing only ignited Diocletian's anger even more. He ordered Sebastian to be beaten to death on the palace steps. After his execution, his body was dumped in the river Tiber to be written off. Yet once again, the Christians recovered his body and buried it in Rome's catacombs, honoring him as a martyr who had sacrificed everything for his faith. Saint Sebastian is regarded as the patron saint of athletes, archers, and soldiers. He is also called upon in many cultures against plagues and epidemics, as it is believed that his intervention can protect against disease. Saint Sebastian is particularly respected in Brazil and is the patron saint of the city of Rio de Janeiro. His story has been a source of inspiration for many over the centuries, and his image remains one of the most recognizable in Christian iconography.
The Roman Empire was the peak of Western civilization during classical antiquity, covering all of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. But in the early days of its history, Rome was just one of the many independent cities on the Italian peninsula that sought commercial and financial stability, as well as to secure their supremacy through military might. According to Roman tradition, Rome's era as a monarchy ended in 509 BC, when a group of noblemen overthrew the last king of Rome. The Romans ultimately replaced the king with two ruling consuls, who exercised the same authority and powers as the king. However, they were elected to serve one-year terms. After this period, new candidates would be elected. As Rome spread its influence into further areas, its political bodies proved resilient and adaptable, encompassing neighboring populations, such as the Etruscan peoples who contested territories with the Romans. By 300 BC, the actual political power in Rome was centrally located in the Senate, which at the time included only members of patrician and wealthy plebeian families. Rome fought many battles against its Etruscan, Greek, and Celtic neighbors. It gradually expanded its dominions as it racked up victories. Although the Gauls sacked and burned Rome in 390 BC, the Romans rebounded under the leadership of military hero Camillus, eventually wresting control of the entire Italian peninsula. By 290 BC, Rome had captured all of central Italy. Then, in 272, it conquered the southern portion of the peninsula after defeating the Greeks led by King Pyrrhus of Epirus in the famous Pyrrhic War. where Magna Graecia was routed. Rome still pursued to annex the territory of Sicily, but it was under the control of Carthage, another military power in the western Mediterranean Sea. In 264 BC, Rome fought a string of conflicts against Carthage, a powerful city-state in North Africa. This round of battles became known as the Punic Wars. The First Punic War ended in 241 BC with the Roman victory. It served as motivation for Rome to build a powerful naval fleet, develop new tactics, and strategically use its navy, army, and alliances in Sicily to drive the Carthaginians off the island. During the Second Punic War, Rome managed to halt the advance and defeat the army of the famous Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca. Leading a massive army of soldiers, mercenaries, and even war elephants, he managed to cross the Alps and reach Italy. As the triumphant power, Rome secured total control of Sicily and much of Spain. After the Second Punic War, Rome was already firmly ensconced as the hegemonic power in the western Mediterranean. The next objective was to conquer Greece, which triggered the so-called Macedonian Wars that lasted from 214 to 148 BC. Rome also spread its influence eastward, defeating King Philip V of Macedonia and turning his kingdom into another Roman province. In the Third Punic War, which ended in 146 BC, the Romans captured and destroyed the city of Carthage and sold its surviving inhabitants as slaves, converting a part of North Africa into a Roman province. At this point in its history, Rome had grown into an empire, even before it was ruled by an emperor. With the laying of many roads connecting the empire's provinces and access to trade in many high-quality products and raw materials, Rome became the political, intellectual, and financial center of classical antiquity. Countless caravans traveled many kilometers to bring back all types of wealth and slave labor to supply the high demands of the Romans. The empire's quick expansion resulted in a series of upheavals in the conquered territories and in the power wielded by the Republic, opening an era of internal turmoil and violence. Inequality between rich and poor increased as wealthy landowners drove small farmers off public lands, while access to government was progressively limited to the more privileged classes. Yet, with the accession of Gaius Marius, a plebeian whose military prowess propelled him to the position of consul in 107 BC, Rome began a new phase in its history. Now, generals who excelled in their military achievements were exalted as celebrities. However, Marius's popularity eventually bred disgruntlement among his fellow generals, in particular General Lucius Cornelius Sulla, which led to a civil war for control of Rome. The civil war between Marius and Sulla was fought from 83 to 81 BC. The war ended with a crucial battle outside the city of Rome. Sulla prevailed and made himself dictator of the Republic. Around 63 BC, Marcus Tullius Cicero was elected consul and defeated the conspiracy of the patrician Catilinus, gaining a reputation as one of Rome's greatest orators. During this period of Roman history, the empire already gripped Spain, much of North Africa, almost all of Anatolia, Syria, and Judea. But Rome was an insatiable beast and was still far from being satisfied with its possessions. It planned to further expand its borders. To accomplish this goal, three of Rome's most powerful men came together in a strategic alliance. The young and ambitious Julius Caesar, the heroic general Pompey, and the wealthy Marcus Licinius Crassus formed the first triumvirate in 60 BC. Julius Caesar marched into Gaul. After 8 years of wars and confrontations led by the Gaul leader Vercingetorix, he succeeded in eliminating the Gaul resistance against the Roman occupation in 50 BC. The region remained part of the Roman Empire for the next 500 years. Caesar made his fortune selling thousands of people into slavery, while also selling goods and products looted from Gaul's cities. Caesar's military glory in Gaul, as well as his growing wealth, overshadowed Pompey's authority, who ruled Rome as sole consul. In 49 BC, Caesar and one of his legions crossed the Rubicon, a river on the border between Italy and Cisalpine Gaul. Caesar's invasion of Italy triggered a civil war from which he emerged victorious and as lifelong dictator of Rome in 45 BCE. Less than a year later, Julius Caesar was murdered on March 15, 44 BC, by a group of his enemies led by the noble republicans Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius. Consul Mark Antony and Caesar's great-nephew and adopted heir Octavian combined forces to crush Brutus and Cassius. They divided power in Rome with former consul Mamercus Aemilius Lepidus Labienus, an alliance that became known as the Second Triumvirate. This new alliance was short-lived. Octavian and Mark Antony soon became enemies. After the defeat of Mark Antony and his lover Cleopatra at Alexandria in 30 BC, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. By 29 BC, Octavian was the only ruler of Rome and all its provinces. To avoid Caesar's fate, he was keen to secure his position as absolute ruler, while reinstating the political institutions of the Roman Republic, while effectively retaining all the royal power for himself. In 27 BC, Octavian assumed the title of Augustus, becoming Rome's first emperor. Augustus's rule re-established morale in Rome after a century of dissension and corruption. This resulted in the famed Pax Romana, which brought 2 full centuries of peace and prosperity. During these 2 centuries, Rome instituted several social reforms, won numerous military victories, and allowed literature, art, architecture, and religion to flourish. Unluckily for the Romans, the dynasty of Augustus would produce a string of unqualified or cruel emperors, such as the unpopular Tiberius, the bloodthirsty and unstable Caligula, and Claudius, most remembered for his conquest of Britain, a goal that was not completed until 84 AD. The Augustus lineage ended with the Emperor Nero, whose overspending drained the Roman treasury and ultimately led to his bankruptcy and eventual suicide. The Roman Empire peaked around 117 AD, under the rule of Emperor Trajan. That was a time of peace for Rome. The criteria for choosing an emperor were the qualities of the candidate and no longer kinship ties. Also, during this period, there were no civil wars or military defeats. Emperor Marcus Aurelius's rule was plagued by conflict, including war against Parthia and Armenia, as well as the invasion of Germanic tribes from the north. When Aurelius fell ill and died near a battlefield in 180 AD, he severed the tradition of non-hereditary succession and appointed his 19-year-old son named Commodus as his successor. Commodus's ineptitude brought an end to the golden age of Roman emperors. His death at the hands of his own cabinet triggered another bout of civil war, from which Lucius Septimius Severus emerged victorious. During the 3rd century, Rome experienced a cycle of almost non-stop conflict. A total of 22 emperors ascended the throne, many of them meeting violent ends at the hands of the very soldiers who thrust them to power. Emperor Constantine became head of the empire in 306 AD. He moved the Roman capital to the Greek city of Byzantium, which he rebranded as Constantinople. It would become the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire for over 1,000 years. Constantine made Christianity the official religion of Rome. 30 years after Constantine's death, a partition of the Roman Empire took place, which engendered the Eastern and Western empires. Despite its ongoing struggle against Persian forces, the Eastern Roman Empire would continue to remain virtually intact for the next few centuries. However, the Western Roman Empire underwent numerous internal conflicts, as well as threats from outside, particularly from Germanic tribes established within the empire's borders. Rome ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own empire, losing its provinces one by one. Britannia around 410, Spain and North Africa in 430. Invasions by Attila and his Huns warriors ravaged Gaul and Italy around 450, further weakening the empire's foundations. In September 476, a Germanic prince named Odoacer took control of the Roman army in Italy. After overthrowing the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustus, Odoacer's troops proclaimed him king of Italy, bringing an ignominious end to the long and tumultuous history of ancient Rome.